A poor girl rushed into a sleek black car thinking it was her Uber, unaware the man behind the wheel was a millionaire CEO, and somehow that wild mistake made him fall for her. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A faint light filtered through the tattered curtains of a cramped studio apartment on the city's outskirts. The peeling paint on the walls, the worn linoleum floor, and the constant hiss of the leaky faucet all seemed to conspire to remind Delia of her hardships. A second-hand alarm clock on the wobbly table flickered 6:07 a.m., but she'd been awake long before it rang. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, much like most things in her life. Outside, the city roared with early commuters catching buses, horns blaring at congested intersections, and occasional sirens fading into the distance. Delia closed her eyes, inhaling the humid morning air. It wasn't the scent of fresh coffee or warm pastries. Her small kitchenette offered no such comforts today. Instead, there was only the stale odor of last night's reheated soup. Yet despite the gloom, she clung to a spark of hope. She always did. That day she had to deliver a portfolio of sketches to the local design institute in the hopes of winning a meager scholarship that might change her path. She dreamed of becoming a fashion designer ever since she learned to hold a pencil, scribbling dresses and patterns on any scrap of paper she could find. But life had taught her to prepare for disappointments, so she gathered her tattered folder of ideas with both determination and dread. "Maybe today," she whispered. "Maybe today something will finally turn around." The day's first challenge was always money. If she walked the entire way, she could save on bus fare, but she'd risk being late. If she paid for a ride, she'd have no money left for lunch. Delia felt her stomach knot at the decision. She bit her lip, then impulsively snatched up her last few coins for bus fare. Being on time to submit her scholarship application was more important than an empty stomach. She checked her phone, a second-hand model that glitched whenever it pleased, and saw no new messages from anyone, just a blank home screen and a low battery warning. She sighed and hurried outside. The hallway leading down to the street was dimly lit, the flickering bulb overhead creating a sense of perpetual twilight. In the distance, muffled by the old walls, she could hear a neighbor's loud argument. Here, arguments and heartbreak were commonplace. The building, like most in this neighborhood, bore silent witness to countless stories of struggle. Stepping onto the busy sidewalk, Delia merged into the city's current of people rushing to workplaces, some in expensive heels, others in worn sneakers. She looked down at her scuffed flats, patched in places with thread she'd used from leftover sewing projects. They'd have to last another month at least. As she turned the corner to the bus stop, the day's humidity pressed against her. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she pulled her hair into a quick ponytail, trying not to stain her sketch portfolio with moisture. The bus arrived, belching dark smoke into the air. She entered, paid the fare with trembling fingers, and found a seat in the back. The trip passed in a haze of anxious thoughts. Could she really convince the scholarship committee that her designs were worth funding? Would she find a better job soon so she could finally move out of that suffocating apartment? She reached the Design Institute, a sleek, modern building that gleamed with polished floors and glass doors. Immediately, she felt out of place. Students stepped out of shiny cars, wearing chic outfits and chatting about weekend trips or expensive shows they'd watched. Delia clutched her portfolio. Each step echoed in her ears as she approached the reception desk. "Good morning," she whispered, clearing her throat. I'd like to submit my sketches for the scholarship program." The receptionist, a polished young man in a crisp shirt, gave her a fleeting glance. His gaze flicked to her worn shoes, her threadbare blouse, and for a moment, Delia felt the heat of shame in her cheeks. But the man simply handed her a form. "Fill this out. The submissions go down the hall to the right." It was neither friendly nor hostile, just dismissive. She let out a breath of relief. At least no immediate rejection. Holding the form, she moved to a small waiting area. Next to her sat others flipping through design sketches on expensive tablets or discussing collaborations. Her own portfolio felt like an artifact of another era. Just pencil, paper, and her heartfelt dreams. Moments later, she dropped her application into a large metal box with a sign reading, "Scholarship Entries." With that done, she left the building, trying to ignore the mocking voice in her head that said, "They'll never pick yours. They'll see you're just a nobody from the poorest corner of town." Outside, the city's heat had intensified. Delia shielded her eyes and considered her next move. She had only a handful of coins left, barely enough for a short bus ride. But she'd be skipping lunch anyway, so what was the point of saving the coins? Perhaps she should just walk to the small cafe where she sometimes found day jobs as a waitress. She needed every spare penny, but more importantly, she needed to show up quickly in case they had a shift. With her mind made up, she set off through the throng of midday crowds. The flamboyant city towers seemed to glimmer overhead, a world she'd never accessed. She had no idea that within those polished skyscrapers, fates were shifting. On the top floor of the city's tallest corporate building, Julian DuPont concluded a tense meeting. Dismissing his board members, he tugged at his tailored suit jacket, a reflex that revealed his impatience. Julian was the CEO of DuPont Enterprises, a conglomerate with roots in finance, tech, and real estate. Handsome, with a reputation for ruthless business acumen, he sat with furrowed brows as he rechecked numbers on his tablet. Shareholders demanded expansions, new acquisitions, bigger profits. He was used to the pressure, but something gnawed at him. The endless cycle of profiteering no longer sparked the excitement it once did. Lately, he found himself gazing from his penthouse window at the city below, wondering about the countless unknown faces, their stories, their struggles. A discreet knock at the door broke his reverie. His personal assistant, a crisp-suited woman named Janelle, stepped in. "Sir, the car is ready. You have that charity gala tonight, but first you wanted to check on the new design partnership?" "Right. Almost forgot." Julian had funded a small design competition earlier that year, something about awarding scholarships to raw talent. His PR team insisted philanthropic gestures improved public image. He rubbed his temples. "Let's just get it over with. Then I'll head to the gala." A few minutes later, Julian boarded the private elevator down to the parking garage. There, his driver awaited by a sleek black sedan, polished to perfection. Sliding into the back seat, he told himself it would be just another day of orchestrated appearances. The driver started the engine, and the hum of the air-conditioned cabin enveloped Julian in a familiar cocoon of luxury. His phone buzzed, another message from the gala organizer about tonight's program. He typed a quick reply, absent-mindedly glancing at the tinted windows. The city glided by in a blur of concrete and neon. He had no idea his day was about to take a sharp turn into the unimaginable. Delia, after an unsuccessful attempt at finding a shift at the small cafe, found herself trudging along an unfamiliar block. Her legs ached. The late afternoon sun was relentless. She considered hailing a cheap rideshare just this once, if it meant escaping the heat and reaching home faster. But home wasn't a comforting thought. She pictured the cramped apartment, the broken doorknob, the flickering hallway light. She'd do anything to take a break from that relentless reality. Without thinking too hard, she opened the rideshare app on her glitchy phone. To her surprise, she saw a car nearby. "That's my chance," she mumbled. A wave of guilt rose. This would cost her last coins. But she couldn't walk another block. Her feet were trembling. She requested the ride. The screen flickered. Then it confirmed. Car arriving. Delia stood on the curb, scanning the street for a battered economy vehicle. Instead, a pristine black sedan pulled over. Her eyebrows shot up. This couldn't be the ride, right? Yet the license plate matched what her phone displayed. Heart pounding, she stepped forward, ignoring every cautionary tale about trusting unknown fancy cars. The passenger door inched open as she tugged the handle. Sliding in, she froze. The back seat was like entering another world. Soft leather, tinted windows, the scent of high-end cologne. Her breath caught. In front, the driver's seat was empty, meaning this must have been one of those top-tier ride services. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her portfolio to her chest, feeling distinctly out of place. A beep from the driver's display alerted Julian, who was scanning his phone. The seat behind him shifted. Strange. Janelle had told him he'd be riding alone today. He turned, confusion lining his features. Sitting there, wide-eyed, was a young woman in a simple blouse, hugging a tattered folder, shoes that had seen better days. She gaped at him, equally startled. For a moment, neither spoke. A strange hush filled the luxurious cabin, as if the city's clamor had faded to a distant echo. Delia felt her heart hammer in her chest. This was not a normal ride-share driver. This man wore an impeccable suit. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine cover, yet before she could comprehend the mistake, the door locked automatically with the car's advanced security system. Hi, she finally managed. Are you my Uber?" A flicker of amusement danced across Julian's face, battling with surprise. "You're... what?" For a split second, it felt as though time itself had paused. The steady hum of the luxury sedan's engine became the only sound in the hushed interior. Delia stared into the stranger's astonished eyes, realizing that she'd just made a monumental blunder. This was clearly not the low-cost rideshare she'd ordered. Everything about it screamed wealth and exclusivity. But how was she supposed to know? The license plate had matched, and she was exhausted from her long day. She swallowed hard, trying to form words to apologize. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her cheeks turning crimson. "The app said the driver was right here, so when I saw this car with the matching plate, I just assumed..." Julian DuPont blinked, still processing what had happened. He stole another glance at his phone's screen, confirming that the new security system must have glitched or cross-referenced the wrong trip. Only then did the absurdity of the situation hit him. A poor girl, obviously unaware of whose vehicle she'd stepped into, was now seated behind him, hugging a worn portfolio as though it was her lifeline. He couldn't suppress a faint grin. For Delia, the silence was unbearable. Was he angry? Amused? Ready to throw her out onto the sidewalk? She grasped the door handle, but with the advanced lock engaged, it wouldn't budge. "I'll get out right away," she insisted, her voice quivering with embarrassment. "I really didn't mean..." He lifted a hand, gesturing for her to stop. "Calm down," he said, voice low and controlled. "I can unlock it from the front. But do you mind telling me how exactly you ended up here? You said, an app told you to get in my car." Delia fought the urge to disappear into the seat cushions. She looked away, finding it hard to meet the intense gaze of this impeccably dressed man. She noticed the sheen of a designer watch on his wrist, the neatly combed dark hair, and the crisp lines of a suit that surely cost more than she made in a month, no, a year. Suddenly, every flaw in her own appearance, from her second-hand blouse to her cheap portfolio, felt magnified. "My phone. It showed me this plate number," she managed to explain. She held up her device, the screen still displaying some glitchy map. "I guess there was some sort of error or..." Julian exhaled, half in frustration at his faulty software, half in bemusement at this twist. "Wonderful," he muttered. "So that's what the new system does, picks up random rideshare requests and confuses them with my personal transport." Without another word, he tapped the controls on his console. The locks clicked. The door was free to open. Delia let out a small breath of relief, pulling on the handle. As she pushed the door ajar, hot city air rushed into the cool space. "Again, I'm sorry," she said softly, pivoting her torso to exit. "I'll find another way home." Before she could plant her feet on the pavement, Julian's driver, who had stepped away momentarily to confirm directions, returned, politely opening the front door. He froze upon realizing someone else was in the back. With a slight bow of apology, he slipped behind the wheel, ignoring Delia's wide-eyed look of embarrassment. The entire situation teetered between comedic and mortifying. Julian glanced at the time on his watch. The day had been long enough. He was due at a charity gala in less than an hour, and traffic was notoriously jammed around sunset. If he let this girl, shy, tired, obviously out of luck, walk away, something in his conscience would prick him for the rest of the night. And Julian DuPont was used to controlling every aspect of his life, including his lingering thoughts. "Wait," he said just as she was about to step out completely. His tone was firm but not unkind. "Where do you live? Are you far from here?" The question seemed strange in Delia's mind. Why did this stranger care? She hesitated, uncertain if revealing her address was wise. She'd never learned to trust easily, especially with men who had power or money. "Why do you ask?" He offered the ghost of a smile. "Because it's getting late, and I'm already behind schedule for an event. If you need a ride, and it's on the way, I can drop you off. After all, it's partly my fault this happened. Some glitch with my system. Consider it an apology from me." Delia weighed the offer. Being stuck in an unknown part of the city at dusk wasn't a pleasant idea, and she didn't relish the thought of another humiliating bus ride, but pride tugged at her heart. She never liked accepting handouts. Yet the alternative was walking, alone, in the dark. Possibly with enough money for a simple bus ride, except she'd used her last coins that morning. She swallowed her pride, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm in Orchard Row," she said at last, avoiding his eyes. "It's a few miles away from here." Julian nodded, then leaned forward to address the driver in a tone that brooked no argument. "You heard the lady. Orchard Row first, then the Westview Hotel for the gala." The driver gave a curt nod, starting the engine with practiced efficiency. In seconds, they merged into the pulsing flow of evening traffic. Delia expected awkward silence, but to her surprise, Julian asked about her day, about where she was coming from. Part of her hesitated. Why would he care? Yet another part felt an odd comfort. He spoke in a low voice, genuinely curious. So she found herself explaining that she'd been to a design institute to submit a scholarship portfolio. She mentioned working part-time, searching for any chance to save money, hoping one day to break into fashion. She left out the lonely apartment and her meager bank account. That was too personal. Julian listened quietly, occasionally nodding. He noticed how her face lit up at the mention of fabrics and sketches, a transformation from timid to passionate in a heartbeat. This girl was different from the society women he often encountered, those who flitted from one glamorous event to another without the faintest trace of real ambition. Delia radiated sincerity. Her eyes sparked with dreams he could almost see shimmering like an oasis in her mind. Somewhere behind them, the city's neon signs flickered to life. Cars honked. Pedestrians rushed across busy intersections. But within the sedan, a strange cocoon of calm enveloped them. A wealthy CEO, accustomed to deals in the millions, and a struggling young designer, barely scraping by. "Are you close with your family?" he asked casually, not quite sure why he ventured into personal territory. Her expression fell just for an instant. She pressed her lips together. "My parents passed away when I was little. I have no siblings. I mostly make do on my own." Julian cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pried." Delia forced a small smile. "It's okay. I'm managing. That's why this scholarship is so important. It might open doors that have been locked to me my entire life." She gave a self-conscious laugh, glancing down at her ragged portfolio. "I doubt my sketches will blow them away, but I have to try, right?" The sincerity in her voice caught Julian off guard. He realized, with a pang, that he couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to someone who dared to show such pure vulnerability. High society was a game of masks, everyone expertly concealing weaknesses, presenting polished facades. In that moment, he envied Delia's ability to be candid about her hardships. It was an honesty he'd rarely encountered. Soon, the car slowed. Outside, the skyline had faded into the gloom of lesser-maintained streets. Buildings were older here, the sidewalks cracked, neon lights replaced by flickering bulbs and failing fixtures. Orchard Row was not the worst neighborhood, but it bore the marks of poverty. Delia pointed to a corner where the bus stop sign leaned at a crooked angle. "You can let me out right here," she said softly. "I live just a block down that way." Julian could sense her discomfort, perhaps not wanting him to see exactly which run-down building she called home. He nodded without pressing further. "All right, but let me at least get the door." Before she could protest, he was already stepping out on the curb. Night air rushed into the cabin again, carrying the faint scent of garbage bins and street food stalls in the distance. Delia scrambled to gather her portfolio, thanking him under her breath. When she tried to exit, her foot caught on the ledge, and she nearly dropped her sketches. A momentary panic flashed in her eyes, but Julian steadied her, placing a firm hand under her elbow. She stared at him, words stuck in her throat. He seemed poised, in control, like a statue carved out of the city's wealth. And yet, in that fleeting instant, she saw a flicker of genuine concern. Not pity, but something gentler, perhaps a silent wish that she'd be all right. She cleared her throat, stepping back onto the cracked sidewalk. "Thank you, Mr." She realized she hadn't even gotten his name. He studied her for a moment. Typically, he'd say DuPont and watch how people's faces changed upon hearing the name of a major corporate empire. But something made him give only his first name. "Julian," he offered, voice low. "And you are—" "Delia," she answered, hugging her folder tighter. "Look, I appreciate the ride. I'm really sorry about—" Julian stopped her from continuing. "No harm done, Delia." He almost smiled, and in the faint orange glow of the single street lamp, his angular features looked kinder. Then he returned to the car, the driver already waiting. The door clicked shut, the engine revved softly, and the sedan merged back into the urban current of headlights and neon signs, leaving Delia standing by the sagging bus stop. She watched until the car was out of sight, a curious heaviness in her chest. It was as if some invisible thread had connected their paths by chance. Reality soon intruded, a distant siren, a clamor from a nearby alley. She needed to get inside quickly before the night unleashed its typical dangers. As she climbed the stairs to her flat, her mind replayed the conversation. Julian. A name that felt both simple and strangely potent. She wondered if she'd ever see him again, though the thought felt absurd. Their worlds were miles apart, him in penthouses and boardrooms, she in daily struggles. Shaking her head, she slipped into her tiny apartment, but even as she locked the door and collapsed onto her squeaky mattress, she couldn't quell the flutter of new thoughts. Who exactly was this man so gracious that he didn't berate her for her mistake? She half expected she'd see something about him in the news. Mysterious CEO crosses paths with poor seamstress. The notion made her smirk. That's the stuff of cheap romance novels, right? She set her portfolio on a chipped desk, flipping through the sketches one more time. They were incomplete, rough around the edges, much like her life. Determination sparked in her tired eyes. She would polish these designs. She'd stay up late if necessary, because if there was one thing she had learned from that brief encounter in the luxurious sedan, it was that you never really know what doors might open once you have the courage to reach for them. Meanwhile, blocks away, the black sedan glided through the city center. Julian stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts. He should have been thinking about the gala, about the speeches he'd have to give, about the stakeholders he needed to impress. Instead, his mind circled back to Delia's earnest face and the quiet way she'd talked about her dreams. It struck him how rarely he met anyone so genuine. He wondered if she'd be safe in that neighborhood. Part of him was tempted to have someone check on her, but that would be too invasive. Besides, it was none of his business, really. Their worlds weren't meant to collide. Yet even as he arrived at the Westview Hotel, stepping onto the polished marble floors under shimmering chandeliers, a faint restlessness followed him. Among the throngs of the affluent, a small, wide-eyed girl with big dreams had unintentionally left a mark on Julian DuPont's carefully ordered life. And, for better or worse, he suspected this wasn't the last time they'd cross paths. A fresh sunrise washed over the city, painting the skyline in subdued oranges and pinks. In her cramped apartment, Delia stirred from a restless sleep. She blinked, disoriented by a dream she couldn't fully recall. Something about riding in a fancy car with velvet soft seats. Then, reality returned in waves. The memory wasn't just a dream. She truly had ridden in a luxury sedan, had come face to face with a stranger named Julian. Quiet wonder flickered across her features. She thought of how kind he'd been, dropping her off without complaint, even though her blunder had surely interrupted his important schedule. Warmth briefly touched her heart, but it was chased away by the sharp pang of her current situation. She glanced around at peeling wallpaper, the battered nightstand, and a leaning stack of books on sewing techniques she'd borrowed from the tiny local library. Sometimes, life granted these rare moments of kindness, brief glimpses into a world she'd never known. But those moments tended to vanish as quickly as they arrived. She sighed, reminding herself that she had to stay grounded. A single act of generosity didn't erase her debt, her overdue rent, or the final notice from the utility company pinned on the fridge. Sitting up, she fingered through her messy hair, then dragged herself to the cracked mirror hanging by the sink. She studied her reflection, noticing the circles under her eyes. Nights spent honing her sketchwork left little energy for rest. Still, a tiny spark of determination glowed within her. She'd used every spare minute after last night's encounter to refine 2 new dress designs. Her lucky breaks, she'd called them. She splashed her face, rummaged through her wardrobe for something passable. A faded blouse and a long skirt that, with any luck, could appear modestly professional. In truth, nothing she owned could disguise her financial struggles. But she straightened her posture anyway, resolved to appear as confident as possible. Today, she planned to visit the Design Institute once more, hoping to speak with someone about the scholarship timeline. Outside, the muggy air was already stifling. It was barely 7 a.m., and the sun was an unforgiving orb hanging over chipped rooftops. Delia navigated the uneven sidewalks, greeting acquaintances she passed. An elderly shopkeeper setting up his fruit stand, a mother shepherding 2 small children toward a daycare. Everyone in the neighborhood bustled with subdued weariness, each carrying private burdens. The bus rumbled into view, carrying that familiar cough of exhaust. Delia climbed aboard, trying not to cringe at the cramped interior. She clutched her battered folder of sketches, newly updated with last night's ideas. If the committee at the Design Institute saw real promise in her concept, maybe they'd expedite the scholarship or give her a small stipend. She hated having to pin her hopes on uncertain possibilities, but that was all she had. Meanwhile, Julian DuPont had slept even less than Delia. After the glittering charity gala where he'd been forced to present a sizable check for some philanthropic cause he barely remembered, he'd stayed up in his penthouse suite, mind drifting repeatedly to the unexpected passenger in his sedan. He couldn't explain why she occupied his thoughts. She was just a girl who'd mistaken his car for an ordinary ride service. Yet the sincerity of her gaze and her unguarded way of speaking had struck him. He'd tried to brush it aside, reminding himself that the gala had been a success. The press took photos, society figures fawned over him, potential business partners exchanged pleasantries. By all accounts, it was a perfect night in the usual DuPont fashion. But in the back of his mind, he'd felt strangely restless, as if something fundamental had shifted. Now, stepping out of his personal elevator into the executive offices of DuPont Enterprises, Julian gazed upon employees who greeted him with polite, carefully rehearsed smiles. He reciprocated with a distant nod. In the hush of the plush hallway, Janelle, the assistant who orchestrated most of his daily life, fell into step beside him. "Morning, sir," she said efficiently. "You have back-to-back appointments today. First, an internal meeting on the new real estate venture, then lunch with a foreign investor. After that—" He raised a hand to pause her. "Janelle, did you happen to find out anything about the glitch with our ride system last night?" A flicker of surprise flashed across her professional features. "Yes, sir. I spoke with the tech team. They said there was an anomaly in the software that geo-matched your car to a standard rideshare request. They're already patching it." He nodded, leaning against the glass wall that overlooked the city. For a fleeting instant, he considered asking if they'd discovered the name of the passenger. But he realized how odd that would sound, especially for a man who carefully guarded his privacy. So he kept quiet. "That's fine," he said, forcing a neutral tone. "I just wanted to be sure it won't happen again." Back at the Design Institute, Delia wove her way through the bustling corridors. Aspiring designers clustered in small groups, discussing fabrics and color palettes. She felt a pang of envy, noticing how easily some spoke of traveling abroad to study fashion. She tried to keep her head up, but her insecurities clung to her like a weight. Finally, she reached the administrative desk. The same receptionist from before was there, tapping away at a computer. He barely glanced at her when she asked about the scholarship timeline. "Results won't be posted for another 3 weeks," he mumbled, stifling a yawn. "If you get chosen, you'll receive an email. If you don't, no further communication." Delia's heart sank. 3 weeks felt like an eternity. Bills wouldn't wait that long. Her landlady had grown increasingly impatient. She forced a polite nod, thanked the receptionist, and retreated, her shoulders heavy. She was about to head for the exit when a door labeled Studio Lab caught her eye. Inside, she glimpsed large cutting tables, mannequins draped in half-finished garments, shelves of fabric rolls in bold colors. It looked like a wonderland of possibility. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, curiosity outweighing her caution. A handful of students worked busily, measuring or pinning fabrics. The hum of a sewing machine merged with low conversation. Delia ran her fingertips over a bolt of shimmering satin, mesmerized. "Can I help you?" a voice asked behind her. A young woman with dyed pink hair and fashionably ripped jeans regarded her with mild suspicion. Delia mustered a smile. "Sorry, I was just admiring the workspace. I'm applying for the scholarship program here and—" The other girl softened. "Right. Well, we don't usually let outsiders just roam in, but if you want to watch for a moment, that's okay. Maybe you'll join us if you get accepted." That small gesture of inclusivity warmed Delia's heart. She spent a few minutes studying how the students pinned patterns, pressed seams, and debated design elements. It was a glimpse of the future she craved. The entire environment, creative chaos, the whir of sewing machines, talk of silhouettes, made her pulse race with anticipation. By the time she left, her resolve had crystallized. She would keep pushing forward, scholarship or not, even if it meant scraping by with extra shifts at the cafe or taking odd sewing jobs. She'd do anything to one day call a place like that home for her craft. Later that morning, Delia sat on a bench outside the institute, letting the city's noise swirl around her. She rummaged through her phone, checking for any job postings. A beep indicated a new message. The cafe manager wanted her to cover a shift that afternoon. Relief surged through her. Maybe it wouldn't pay much, but it would cover a fraction of what she owed. She briskly rose and headed toward the nearest bus stop. Traffic crawled. Hours melted away. By the time she arrived at the cafe, a cozy corner place with mismatched tables, her stomach growled from skipping lunch again. Still, she tucked away her hunger. She changed into an apron and got to work, balancing trays of coffee and pastries. Inside the air-conditioned elegance of DuPont Enterprises, Julian paced before his floor-to-ceiling windows. The rest of the morning had been a haze of meetings, numbers, profits, expansions. It all blurred. Somehow, each conversation felt less significant than usual. He remembered how Delia had spoken passionately about her sketchwork. A certain sincerity had glowed in her eyes. That kind of spark, that hunger for creation. He rarely glimpsed it in corporate halls. Most associates were driven by ambition or a thirst for money. But genuine passion for an art? That was rare. Before he realized what he was doing, he opened his phone's contact list, tapping a number. It rang twice. A mild voice answered, "DuPont Charitable Foundation offices, good afternoon." "Good afternoon," Julian said. "This is Julian DuPont. I'd like some information about the local design scholarship we're sponsoring, the one that's being administered through the city's institute." A brief shuffle of papers on the other end. "Ah, yes, Mr. DuPont. We have a partnership with them, providing grants to underprivileged design students, if I'm not mistaken. Is there something specific you'd like to know?" Julian hesitated, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically unsure. "Well, just the status. When do they announce recipients? How many spots are open this year?" The clerk explained that they were awarding a small number of grants, all decided by a panel at the Institute in collaboration with the Foundation's guidelines. Announcements wouldn't come for another few weeks. Julian nodded to himself, trying to sound casual. "All right. Keep me posted. I might want a final look at the shortlist before final decisions are made." "Certainly, sir," came the polite reply. He ended the call, gaze drifting toward the urban sprawl below his office. Why was he doing this? He told himself it was merely to check on a philanthropic initiative, ensuring it ran smoothly. Yet he couldn't ignore the small hope flickering in his chest, that maybe among the entries a certain portfolio from a girl named Delia would stand out, and if it didn't, perhaps there was something he could do. A quiet nudge, an extra slot. The very thought felt both noble and strangely personal. He'd never meddled in scholarship processes before, priding himself on fairness and professional distance. But this time, the idea of letting that spark of talent go unnoticed troubled him more than he cared to admit. With a quiet exhale, Julian resolved to keep track of the scholarship's progress. If fate willed it, and if her work was truly as earnest as her words suggested, maybe he could help. A single gesture could make all the difference for someone on the brink. He pressed a button on his desk, summoning Janelle with a new meeting request. As he waited, a subdued excitement pulsed in his veins, a hint that, for once, not everything in his life was about cold strategies or business expansions. Something new, something more human, had entered his rigid world. That evening, Delia finished her cafe shift with throbbing feet and the smell of coffee clinging to her clothes. Tips had been decent, but still a pittance compared to her obligations. She walked home under flickering streetlights, clutching the envelope of her pay. She couldn't know that somewhere in a penthouse overlooking the city, a man named Julian was about to set unexpected forces in motion. Forces that might just bridge the chasm between her modest bench outside the Design Institute and the world of opportunity she dared to dream about. A dull drizzle greeted Delia as she stepped onto the curb the next morning, her umbrella riddled with tiny holes that did little to repel the steady drip of rain. Despite the gloomy weather, she wore a small, determined smile. She had new leads on small sewing gigs, nothing fancy, just hemming pants, patching shirts, or altering a neighbor's old dress. Every bit of income mattered. She clutched an envelope containing the cafe's previous day's pay. After covering rent with her landlady, who had eyed her with typical skepticism, Delia was left with a handful of crumpled bills. Not enough to last the week, but it would keep the lights on a little longer. She quickened her pace, stepping over puddles on her way to the local library. The library was her refuge. Its aging shelves and worn carpets smelled of old paper and dust, a comforting aroma of possibilities. She needed their free internet to check job postings and see if the Design Institute had any workshop announcements. Settling at a faded wooden table beneath a flickering ceiling light, she booted up one of the library's antiquated computers. Her email inbox blinked. The usual spam, a polite but firm reminder from her phone carrier about her overdue balance, and something from the Design Institute's events department. She held her breath as she clicked it open. Invitation to Open Workshop, Designers Showcase. The body of the email explained that next week, the Institute would host a one-day workshop and mini-exhibition, giving prospective students, particularly scholarship applicants, a chance to see professional demonstrations. They encouraged participants to bring a single garment or design concept to display for feedback. It wasn't the official scholarship result, but it was an opportunity to show her work to potential mentors, maybe even snag a connection that could help her career. A flutter of excitement rose in her chest. True, it required some materials and likely a small participation fee, but perhaps she could manage. Even if it meant skipping meals, she was determined to go. She whispered a quick thanks to the universe, logged off and headed for the library's exit, mentally listing the steps she needed to prepare a decent outfit to show at the workshop. Meanwhile, at DuPont Enterprises headquarters, Julian stood at the head of a conference table, discussing plans for an upcoming product launch. His board members listened intently, but he noticed their expressions hinted at polite restlessness. The entire discussion felt formulaic, as if every step had been rehearsed countless times in board meetings past. When the meeting concluded, his CFO lingered to ask about a delayed real estate investment. Julian gave short answers, mind elsewhere. Only after the CFO left did he finally exhale and loosen his tie. He walked to the wide window that overlooked the city, arms folded. This used to be the pinnacle of his ambitions, to lead these board meetings, secure massive deals, and expand the DuPont empire. Yet, a strange emptiness had crept into that sense of accomplishment. He thought again of Delia, of the quiet determination in her eyes. It was perplexing how someone he barely knew kept surfacing in his thoughts. Still, he found himself more committed than ever to follow up on that design scholarship. A discreet knock at the door drew him back to the present. Janelle entered, balancing a stack of papers. "Sir, these are the final documents for the philanthropic programs. You mentioned wanting to review them." Julian nodded. "Thank you, Janelle. Leave them here. Has the foundation confirmed how many scholarships they're awarding at the Design Institute?" She flipped through her notes. "They'll grant 3 major scholarships this cycle. The Institute's panel will select finalists soon. I believe the foundation has the right to offer a special discretionary spot as well if they see exceptional talent that the panel might overlook." He raised a brow. "A discretionary spot?" "Yes," she explained. "It's in the official agreement. They've rarely exercised it, but it exists so that the foundation's board can recognize an outstanding candidate who, for whatever reason, might not qualify in the usual process." Julian mulled that over. "Keep me informed on that. If the Institute misses a deserving candidate, I want to know." Janelle's face didn't betray any surprise. She was too accustomed to Julian's meticulous involvement in every DuPont project. She gave a professional nod, leaving him alone with the stack of documents. That afternoon, Delia wrapped up a small sewing gig, patching the torn uniform of a school crossing guard. He paid her in loose change and a grateful smile. "Keeps me from having to buy a new uniform," he explained. She thanked him and tucked the coins into her pocket. Next, she swung by a fabric store, one she typically only window shopped because quality materials were far beyond her means. But she had to try. The workshop invitation urged attendees to bring a sample design. Delia planned a simple but elegant evening dress prototype, something that could show off her sense of style, yet wouldn't devour an entire spool of costly fabric. Stepping inside the store was like entering a kaleidoscope of color. rolls of fabric in shimmering blues, bold reds, subtle creams. Each had its own texture and price tag, mostly out of her budget. She trailed her fingertips along the swaths of satin, organza, brocade, each whispering possibilities. Her heart ached, wishing she could afford more than a half yard of anything. At last, she found a discounted bolt, a muted, silver-gray crepe that had a small defect near one edge, causing it to be on clearance. She asked the clerk if they had any remnants. The clerk rummaged in a bin and offered a leftover piece at a fraction of the cost. Delia ran her hand over it. It would be enough for the bodice of her design, maybe with a little creative piecing. She purchased the discounted crepe and a few yards of plain lining fabric, her final coins disappearing in the transaction. With that, she left the store. A thrill coursed through her, tempered by the knowledge that her wallet was now almost empty. But she had what she needed, enough raw material to craft the beginnings of a dream. That night in her cramped apartment, Delia spread the newly acquired fabric across her tiny table. She examined the flaw near one corner, a small tear and color inconsistency. It would require strategic cutting to hide the defect, but she was confident she could manage. She taped her sketches to the wall with bits of reused tape. They depicted a sleeveless dress with a slightly draped neckline, cinched waist, and an asymmetrical hemline that fell just above the knees. Simple, but with a sophisticated silhouette. If executed properly, it could appear far more expensive than its meager cost. Her hands moved nimbly, measuring, marking seams with chalk. She hummed quietly, forgetting her hunger and fatigue. This was her element, the place where her imagination bloomed. Every now and then, a drip from the faucet or the rumble of traffic outside jarred her from concentration, but she kept at it until past midnight. When at last she set down her scissors, part of the dress had begun to take shape. She held the pinned pieces up to her body in the mirror, eyes shining with pride. It wasn't anywhere near finished, but it felt real, tangible. And in this dingy apartment, that sense of possibility was everything. In contrast, Julian returned to his penthouse after another day of polished negotiations. Outside, the drizzle had turned to a full downpour, pattering against floor-to-ceiling windows. He rolled his shoulders, feeling tension from hours of corporate politicking. Then he switched on a modest lamp, leaving the rest of the penthouse in soft shadow. He loosened his tie, drifting to the living area where a sleek glass coffee table held a stack of magazines. Fashion, business, architecture. He kept them around for variety, or perhaps out of a restless need to stay informed about all corners of culture. As he rifled through them, he caught a glimpse of an advertisement for the Design Institute's upcoming events. The tagline boasted, "Showcase the talent of tomorrow." His mind leapt to Delia. Was she aware of that showcase? Did she plan to attend? Should he see for himself? The notion seemed absurd. Julian DuPont, billionaire CEO, sneaking into a student workshop. But curiosity prodded him. He wanted to see if her quiet passion translated to genuine skill. He reasoned that if he was going to personally ensure the scholarship was awarded fairly, maybe it was wise to scout potential recipients. Yet he also sensed a more personal motive, the desire to know how Delia was faring. If she still harbored that same spark he'd glimpsed in her gaze, maybe supporting her wasn't just philanthropy. Maybe it was something akin to fulfilling an unvoiced longing for authenticity in his own life. He typed a quick message to Janelle. Check if the Design Institute's mini-exhibition is open to sponsors or donors. Let me know. For a moment, he felt a flicker of excitement. The hush of the penthouse pressed on him, the storm outside reflecting his internal tumult. He realized how rarely he felt this sense of anticipation, how seldom anything truly piqued his interest beyond the next business conquest. Drumming his fingers on the coffee table's edge, he flipped the magazine shut. He had no idea if Delia would even be there, or if she'd made progress on her portfolio, or if she'd simply given up. But something told him she wasn't the type to give up easily. Days rolled by in a blur for Delia. She worked double shifts, accepted small seamstress tasks, and fought exhaustion to continue sewing her showcase dress each night. Progress was slow, but steady. She borrowed a friend's iron and pressing board, meticulously smoothing each seam so the garment would look clean and professional. She rummaged through her limited resources for any spare embellishments. In a thrift store, she found an outdated beaded top, threadbare and stained. But the beadwork near the neckline was exquisite. She purchased it for mere pocket change, then painstakingly harvested the beads, planning to apply them delicately to her dress's neckline. Perhaps that detail would catch the eye of the Institute's instructors. Finally, the day arrived. The workshop was set to begin at 10 a.m. Delia woke with a pounding heart, triple-checking that she had everything. The half-finished dress, pinned onto a form she'd rigged from a foam mannequin torso, plus her sketches. She wore her best outfit, still an old blouse and skirt but carefully pressed. No money for a taxi, so she left early to walk most of the way, carrying her creation under a protective plastic cover to shield it from any stray drizzles. Outside the Institute, the sidewalk buzzed with young designers wheeling rolling racks, mannequins wrapped in plastic, arms full of fabric and sewing kits. Delia's stomach churned. Many wore stylish clothes, hair perfectly coiffed. Their confident chatter indicated they'd done this 100 times. She felt like a lone sparrow among peacocks. Inside, a large hall teemed with activity. Rows of tables and stands were set up for participants to display their pieces. Delia found an unoccupied space near the back, grateful to avoid the main spotlight. She carefully arranged her garment, smoothing creases with trembling hands. "First time here?" someone asked. Delia turned to see an older woman, possibly a professor wearing a flowing caftan. She had warm, appraising eyes. "Yes," Delia replied, trying not to fidget. "I'm just a scholarship applicant." The woman smiled. "Well, don't be shy. This workshop is about growth, not perfection." Then she wandered off to help another student, leaving Delia oddly comforted. Julian's car navigated the busy streets leading to the Institute, tinted windows concealing his identity. Janelle had discreetly arranged for him to attend as a foundation representative, which wasn't far from the truth. He surveyed the passing scenery with a mix of anticipation and nerves, an unusual sensation for him. He reminded himself that he was simply here to observe. No personal agenda. Of course not. As the sedan pulled up, he slipped on a pair of understated sunglasses and stepped out, leaving his usual entourage behind. Inside the building, he was directed to the hall where the mini-exhibition took place. The hum of excitement reached him even before he entered, voices discussing fabrics, colors, and final touches. He walked among the displays, nodding politely at designs that caught his eye. Some were clearly well-funded with luxury materials and professional finishing. Others showed raw creativity, if less polish. Julian felt strangely out of his element. In these halls, creativity reigned, a far cry from corporate spreadsheets and polished marketing pitches. And then, near the back, he saw her. Delia stood by a simple table, adjusting a draped silver-gray dress on a makeshift mannequin. She wasn't wearing anything flashy, just that same determined air he remembered. A gentle look of focus tightened her features. He paused, making sure to keep some distance, uncertain if she'd be happy or mortified to see him. From a vantage behind a rack of garments, he watched as a couple of Institute staffers approached Delia's display. She spoke quietly, pointing out her sketches, carefully explaining the design's lines, the beadwork she'd salvaged. The staffers nodded, offering mild praise and suggestions. Julian couldn't make out every word, but he caught glimpses of her face, nervous but proud. A small, unexpected surge of admiration warmed his chest. What was it about her that evoked such a feeling? Maybe it was the sheer tenacity she radiated. He felt a spike of guilt for standing like a voyeur. Perhaps he should greet her, but how? "Hello? Remember me? The guy whose car you accidentally got into?" He was still grappling with that dilemma when a different staff member recognized him, stepping forward with a polite smile. "Mr. DuPont, we're honored you came to see our workshop. Can I guide you around to some of the top candidates?" He nodded politely, but his eyes drifted back to Delia. "Yes, of course. I'm here on behalf of the Foundation, but actually, I'd like to start over there." He pointed discreetly in Delia's direction. "Who's that?" The staff member followed his gaze. "Oh, that's a scholarship applicant, Delia something. She's quite new, hasn't had formal training, but her design has potential." Julian nodded, swallowing a small smile. "I'd love to hear more about her work." Together they approached. Delia, absorbed in making sure her display didn't topple, didn't notice them until they were mere steps away. She turned, and her breath caught. Because there he was, Julian DuPont, in the flesh, dressed in a tailored suit that somehow seemed subdued, yet still unmistakably expensive. For an instant, shock flashed in her eyes. Her mind spiraled. Why was he here? How did he find her? Was he part of the Design Institute's staff or a sponsor? She fumbled to steady the mannequin. Julian gave her a polite, reassuring nod. "Hello, Delia." His tone was calm, as though he'd run into an old friend. "It's good to see you again." Her face heated, words tangling on her tongue. She managed a shaky greeting, tugging self-consciously at her blouse. The staffer began to praise her design, highlighting how creative she'd been with limited materials. Julian listened, occasionally glancing at Delia to gauge her reaction. She stood stiff as a post, clearly uneasy. When the staffer drifted on to greet others, Julian and Delia faced each other in awkward silence. The hum of conversations and rustling fabric seemed to fade around them. Finally, Julian stepped closer, voice low so only she could hear. I didn't realize you'd be here," she blurted, feeling silly the moment it left her lips. Of course he'd be here for some reason. He was obviously connected to the Institute. He managed a small grin. "Let's just say I have an interest in their scholarship program. So you're showcasing your dress?" He glanced at the garment and let out a quiet exhale. "It's beautiful work." Her heart pounded at the compliment. "It's not finished yet," she mumbled. "I'm hoping to refine the side seams and fix the drape. But thank you." Julian nodded. "May I?" He motioned to the fabric near the waistline, and when she nodded, he ran his fingertips lightly over the carefully sewn pleats. There was genuine admiration in his eyes. Delia felt her cheeks warm again, uncertain if she was more embarrassed or proud. Before she could stammer out more than a polite thanks, the older professor in the flowing caftan reappeared, clearing her throat in a friendly manner. "Delia, I see you have quite an esteemed visitor," she teased lightly. Then, turning to Julian, "Mr. DuPont, is it? The staff mentioned you might observe today on behalf of the Foundation." "Yes," he said, carefully stepping back from the dress. "I'm here to see the potential scholarship recipients. Delia's design caught my eye." Delia's stomach flipped. The professor smiled. "We're going to give her feedback shortly in a small critique group. You're welcome to observe." Julian turned to Delia. "Do you mind if I listen in?" She swallowed. The possibility of him hearing every critique on her work made her nerves spike. But curiosity, and perhaps a desire to prove she was capable, pushed her to nod. "All right," she whispered, "if you want to." As the professor led them to a table where a group of instructors waited, Delia tried to calm the whirlwind inside her. She never imagined a day like this. Her modest design in front of real professionals and incredibly the man whose car she'd randomly entered weeks ago. Whether this was fate or coincidence, she couldn't say. All she knew was that if she wanted to seize this chance, truly chase her dream, she'd have to keep her wits about her. Because for better or worse, Julian DuPont was here, and his presence alone felt like a doorway into a different world. The circular critique area at the Institute's workshop had been set up with simple folding chairs, a few tables for displaying designs, and a half-dozen instructors, each clutching clipboards. A few fellow scholarship applicants hovered in the wings, anxiously awaiting their turn. For Delia, it felt like stepping onto a stage. She carefully positioned her partially finished gray crepe dress atop a dress form. The lighting was harsh and direct, revealing the garment's every seam and subtle imperfection. Her hands trembled as she smoothed down the skirt. The clack of a pen from one of the instructors made her jump. A wave of self-consciousness swept through her, and she was suddenly hyper-aware of her second-hand blouse and scuffed shoes. Julian took a seat off to the side, near an instructor wearing bold-rimmed glasses. Though he attempted to look at ease, Delia sensed an undercurrent of tension in his posture. She wondered what in the world he must be thinking. Just days ago she'd been scrambling for bus fare, and now he was here, observing her design like an unexpected guardian angel, or perhaps a silent judge. Either way, her heart pounded. "All right, Delia," said an older professor with salt-and-pepper hair and a gentle smile. "We've seen your sketches and a bit of your process photos. Now, can you explain the inspiration behind this piece? What kind of statement or customer are you envisioning?" Delia drew a shaky breath. She'd rehearsed her explanation in her head 100 times. "I wanted to create something that felt both accessible and refined," she began, voice wavering. "I used a draped neckline to convey elegance, with beaded detail around the collar to catch the eye. But I chose a simpler silhouette and a neutral color so it could fit multiple occasions. It's for a woman who wants a graceful look but doesn't have a huge budget." An instructor with bright blue hair nodded approvingly. "That's a thoughtful direction. Did you use a commercial pattern for the bodice or draft it yourself?" A flicker of pride sparked in Delia. "I drafted it myself. I had to. There was a flaw in the fabric that forced me to cut the pattern pieces in a non-standard layout, so I adjusted the darts and side seams to work around that." A man in a crisp blazer, likely a pattern-making expert, leaned forward. "I see the princess seams, but you've combined them with a side panel that extends toward the back. That's not a typical design line. Was that deliberate?" Delia nodded, flipping open her sketchbook. "Yes, I wanted to elongate the silhouette by drawing the eye diagonally. It also helped hide the fabric defect under one of the seams." A low, collective hum of intrigue spread among the instructors. Delia's nerves eased slightly. Then came questions about her finishing techniques, her choice of beads, and her plan for refining the drape on the left side. Each time she responded candidly, admitting her sewing machine was ancient, that she'd upcycled the beads, that she still needed to properly line the bodice. The instructors asked more technical queries, scribbling notes. Despite the intensity, Delia sensed genuine curiosity in their expressions, not dismissiveness. Julian watched from the sidelines, arms folded. He caught her eye once, offering a faint smile of encouragement. That small gesture buoyed her. He seemed genuinely impressed, perhaps even proud. It was bewildering to feel comfort from a man she barely knew, yet his presence steadied her trembling heart, reminding her that, improbable as it was, someone believed she belonged in this environment. At length, the lead professor thanked her and excused the panel for a brief consultation. They stepped aside to converse in hushed tones. Delia rubbed her palms on her skirt, feeling the adrenaline subside. She had no idea if she'd met their standards or not. The only certainty was that she'd spoken her truth. "You did great," murmured a voice to her left. She turned to find Julian standing a respectful distance away. He'd approached quietly once the instructors stepped aside. His gaze flicked from the dress to her tense expression. "They asked a lot of questions, but you handled it well. You showed them you know your craft." Delia managed a small smile. "I'm just grateful they listened. Most of the time people shrug off my ideas because I don't have formal schooling." "I doubt anyone here shrugged you off," Julian said, nodding toward the group of instructors still chatting. "They were obviously interested in how you worked around the fabric flaw. That's real ingenuity." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "And that's the kind of thing scholarship committees look for, a spark plus technical adaptability." She studied him a moment, trying to unravel his intentions. She still didn't fully comprehend why he was so invested. But his words warmed her chest like a carefully lit flame. "Thank you," she whispered, glancing down at her hands. "I appreciate the support." Before Julian could respond, the professor in the flowing caftan beckoned Delia closer. "We've discussed it," she said with a welcoming smile. "While this isn't a final decision on the scholarship, we want to note how impressed we are with your resourcefulness. We see room for growth, particularly in refining your tailoring. But your problem-solving and sense of proportion are wonderful. Keep developing your techniques. You show a great deal of promise." Delia's cheeks burned with relief and joy. Bowing her head, she thanked them profusely. Part of her wanted to jump up and shout. Her piece had been taken seriously by professionals, her very first validation from people in this industry. As the group moved on, Delia dared to exhale. She felt nearly weightless. Julian hovered at her side, observing the surge of emotion shining in her eyes. "That sounded like very good feedback," he commented, lips curving in a slight smile. "You should be proud." Unable to contain her grin, Delia nodded. This was more than I hoped for. Even if I don't get the scholarship, I'll keep pushing. At least now I know I'm not completely off track." He watched her face glow. Something about her unguarded happiness stirred him in ways he hadn't anticipated, like a reminder of simpler triumphs, victories unmeasured by stock shares or bottom lines. A polite cough interrupted. The older professor with salt and pepper hair had returned, regarding Julian with a curious air. "Mr. DuPont, you might be interested to know our entire workshop group is assembling for a short presentation in the lecture hall. Students will discuss their inspirations, and we'll talk about next steps. You're welcome to attend. Would you like Delia to join you?" Delia blinked, nerves flaring again, but Julian nodded smoothly. "Yes, I'd like that. If Delia is comfortable going?" A mixture of excitement and intimidation whirled inside her. Could she keep up with these more experienced applicants in a lecture hall setting? Then again, opportunities to glean advice from professionals were priceless, and Julian's presence gave her a strange sense of security. So she swallowed her nerves. "I'd love to come," she said quietly. They followed the professor across the bustling workshop floor, weaving between dress forms, cutting tables, and garment racks. Delia clutched her phone, silently praying her landlady wouldn't text about the next rent deadline. For now, she wanted to savor this moment without real life crashing in. The lecture hall resembled a small auditorium, seats arranged in rows facing a modest stage. Students, staff, and a few potential donors were already filtering in. Julian guided Delia to sit beside him near the front, though she hesitated, feeling she had no right to such a prime spot. Still, he insisted politely, and she relented. A flurry of introductions preceded the presentation. Each of the Institute's lead instructors took turns at the podium, discussing design philosophies, upcoming scholarship timelines, and the importance of fresh voices in the fashion world. Delia attempted to memorize every nugget of wisdom, heart drumming with excitement. She'd never experienced something quite so formal, so intellectual about what she'd always done instinctively. When the panel opened the floor to questions, established students peppered them with queries about advanced pattern-making software, recommended overseas internships, and niche historical influences. Delia listened in awe, scribbling notes on scrap paper she dug from her purse. She felt like an outsider peering through a window into a dream, but she was determined not to remain an outsider for long. Eventually, an administrative staff member addressed the crowd about final deadlines for the scholarship competition. Delia sat up straighter. "All portfolios, including at least one finished piece, must be submitted by next Friday," he announced. "Then we'll do final judging the following week. The winners will be announced at our annual design gala, where local press and sponsors, like Mr. DuPont's foundation, will attend." Delia's eyes widened. That was less than 2 weeks away. She mentally calculated, finishing her dress to a high standard, compiling a polished portfolio, balancing her cafe shifts. She might manage it, if nothing went wrong. Yet, the mention of a design gala conjured up images of ritzy evening events, wine glasses clinking, and a polished runway, very unlike her usual daily grind. Could she possibly fit in there? Doubt pricked her confidence. Julian leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Next Friday is your deadline, then. You have plenty of time to finish, right?" She forced a brave nod. "I hope so. It'll be tight, but I'll do everything I can. Honestly, I didn't realize a full garment submission was mandatory. I thought my half-finished piece and sketches might suffice." He nodded thoughtfully. "If you run into any obstacles—" His voice trailed, catching. Part of him wanted to say, "Come to me." But he was aware of how imposing that might sound, a rich CEO offering help she might interpret as charity. He cleared his throat. "I'm sure you'll find a way," he ended softly, leaving the offer unspoken but hinted. She glanced sideways at him, suspecting the meaning beneath his words. Warm gratitude filled her chest, but she wasn't sure how to respond, not wanting to appear needy or indebted. So she simply whispered, "Thank you. Really." The remainder of the presentation passed in a blur, with instructors showcasing advanced student work and highlighting the need for unique perspectives in the industry. When the session ended, everyone rose to mingle. Delia felt her pulse easing. This was exhilarating but also emotionally draining. Julian turned to her, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. "Do you have time to talk? Perhaps grab a coffee? I'd like to hear more about how you learned to draft patterns on your own." Her mind spun. She was stunned that he'd want a further conversation, let alone share a coffee. But then she remembered she had a shift at the cafe soon. The bus ride was lengthy, and if she was late, her boss would be furious. I'm sorry, I actually have to hurry off to work," she admitted, cheeks flushing. "I'm a waitress at a little cafe near Orchard Row." A flicker of disappointment crossed his features, but he masked it quickly. "That's all right. Work is important. May I drive you there? It would save you time." Delia swallowed. Her last experience in his luxurious car was still fresh, but she truly was pressed for time, and the notion of skipping the cramped bus was tempting. After a moment's internal debate, she nodded. "If it's not too far out of your way, that would really help. Thank you." They exchanged few words as they walked out to the parking lot. The sky remained gray, threatening another drizzle. She clutched her plastic-wrapped dress form in one arm. He offered to carry it, but she politely refused, too proud to let him bear her burdens. A black sedan, reminiscent of their first encounter, awaited them. This time Delia knowingly took the passenger seat in front while Julian settled behind the wheel himself. No driver in sight. As he guided the car onto the main road, the cityscape blurred around them in a drizzle-splattered haze. Delia gave directions, occasionally glancing at Julian's steady profile. Perhaps it was the quiet rush of riding with him alone that made her stomach flutter, or maybe it was the knowledge that, in less than 2 weeks, she'd face one of the biggest moments of her life, submitting her final garment to the Institute. And somehow, whether by chance or destiny, Julian had a role in that future. She sensed it like a subtle current humming beneath everyday reality. He pulled up in front of the small cafe, slowing to let her out. She thanked him, juggling her dress form, portfolio, and umbrella. Raindrops pelted the windshield. "Delia," he said softly before she closed the door, "good luck finishing your design. I hope it all goes smoothly." She smiled, a tentative, heartfelt curve of her lips. "Thank you. For everything, I really mean it." With that, she slipped out into the damp sidewalk. The cafe's neon sign flickered overhead. Behind her, the sedan eased away, disappearing into the drizzle. And so continued the unlikeliest of friendships, a precarious bridge between two worlds, carried forward by a mutual spark neither fully understood but couldn't bear to extinguish. A thin golden sunbeam filtered through Delia's apartment window at dawn, illuminating the chaotic mess of fabric scraps, reference books, and half-finished sketches on her tiny table. She was already up, pinning fabric for the bodice lining. Sleep had become a fleeting luxury these past few days. Her looming deadline for the scholarship submission weighed heavily on her mind. A crinkled to-do list lay beside the sewing machine. She glanced at it. Finish all hems. Add final beadwork. Secure hidden zipper. Photograph for portfolio. Print sketches in color. Borrow money for printing? Her forehead creased at the last item. Even the cost of color printing was more than she could comfortably spare. Yet the judges always seemed to appreciate neatly presented portfolios. She chewed her lower lip, mentally balancing her cafe tips and the cost of thread, needles, and a few bus fares. If nothing unexpected came up, she might manage it. But in Delia's world, something unexpected almost always did. Just then her phone pinged. She dropped her needle to check the screen, an anxious reflex. Her heart sank. A message from her landlady, terse and unyielding. Rent due next Monday. Don't be late this time or I'll have to give notice. Setting the phone aside with a trembling hand, Delia inhaled sharply. Monday? She'd been hoping to push rent to the end of the week. That left only her upcoming cafe shift and some small mending tasks to gather enough money. She rubbed her temples, determined not to let panic derail her sewing, one crisis at a time. With resolve, she returned to the bodice lining. Time slipped by in a haze of whirring stitches and the hiss of steam from her borrowed iron. The sun climbed higher, lighting the worn wallpaper. Eventually, hunger forced her to break. She rummaged for a single packet of instant noodles, the last in her cupboard. She half-heartedly boiled water, mind spinning with strategies for rent. Maybe she could ask for a small advance at the cafe. But the manager was already tight on funds, or she could try to peddle a few sketches to some local boutique. That seemed far-fetched. She pictured picking up the phone, calling Julian, but the idea both reassured and frightened her. She'd never been one to beg for help. Pride formed a hard knot in her throat at the mere notion. Shaking off the thought, she slurped the watery noodles and went back to work. If she could at least finalize her scholarship entry, perhaps she'd stand a real chance at forging a better future. And in the short term, well, she'd figure out rent somehow. Mid-afternoon, Delia dashed across town to the cafe, garment bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't dare leave the precious, nearly finished piece at home for fear of a leak or some other disaster. At least she could keep an eye on it while working her shift. The cafe was mildly busy. Customers sipped coffee and tapped on laptops, while the pastry case gleamed with muffins and croissants. Delia slipped on her apron, plastering a polite smile. By now she had the routine down pat. Greet each table, memorize orders, and dart between cappuccino machine and pastry counter. The hours ticked by in a flurry of steaming cups and clinking plates. Though physically exhausting, the work gave her a chance to mentally plan her final steps for the dress. She'd add extra beading near the collar, refine the drape at the left hip, and triple-check that all seam allowances lay flat. With luck, she could photograph it tomorrow, then print out her designs on Monday, right before delivering them to the institute. A familiar figure at a corner table jolted her from her thoughts. She nearly dropped her notepad. Julian DuPont sat there, dressed in a crisp shirt with sleeves rolled just enough to reveal a sleek watch. He was studying the cafe menu, though he seemed more relaxed than one might expect of a powerful CEO. Was he here on purpose? Did he know she worked today? Her face heated. Clutching her notepad, she hesitated. Approaching him felt daunting. Yet he was a customer. Summoning courage, she crossed the floor with measured steps. "Hello," she said quietly, voice more timid than usual. Welcome. What can I get for you?" He glanced up, a quick smile lighting his face. "Hello, Delia. I'll just have a latte, please. No sugar. And maybe a slice of that banana bread? She jotted down the order, trying not to appear overly flustered. Sure, right away. When she turned to go, he gently touched her elbow. Any chance you have a break soon? He asked softly. I hoped we could talk a bit, if you don't mind. Delia swallowed. I get a short break in about an hour after the lunch rush. She noticed her manager eyeing her from the counter, so she flashed a polite smile to Julian and retreated. As she made his latte, her heart drummed. Why was he here? It wasn't that she was unhappy to see him. Part of her felt a surprising relief, but another part braced for awkwardness. Within minutes, she delivered the latte and banana bread. Here you are, she said, setting them on the table. He nodded his thanks and resumed browsing something on his phone. She darted off to handle other customers, though she occasionally sneaked glances at him. He sipped slowly, seeming patient and unhurried, unlike typical corporate hotshots who bark orders for quick coffee. When the lunch rush dwindled, Delia ducked into the back room, hanging up her apron. She quickly checked her reflection in a storage room mirror, her hair slightly askew, face tired from the morning's sewing. Nothing to be done. She took a breath and stepped out to find Julian still at his table, reading emails or articles. He looked up the moment she emerged. Can I join you? She asked uncertainly, gesturing to the empty chair. Though he'd invited her, she still felt like the intruder. Please, he said, setting his phone aside. She slid into the seat, posture stiff. Thanks for coming by, she ventured. I wasn't expecting to see you here. He studied her face. I had some errands in the area. Thought I'd try the coffee here. It's quite good. His tone was light, but the hint of a smile suggested a dual motive. How's your dress coming along? Delia's shoulders relaxed a fraction. She could talk about sewing all day. I'm nearly done. Just finishing touches. I'm hoping to take photos tomorrow. Then I'll finalize my sketches for the scholarship panel. That's great, Julian said, genuine warmth in his voice. I'd love to see it again when it's finished, but no pressure. She offered a shy smile, nodding. Sure, once it's presentable. A beat passed, their gazes tangling. She coughed lightly, lowering her eyes. How about you? Busy? With, well, corporate things? He chuckled softly. Always. But I've been juggling some philanthropic interests, too, keeping tabs on the scholarship program. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your name came up in a recent discussion. The Institute staff seems quite intrigued by your work. Delia's stomach fluttered. Oh? She tried to play it cool, but excitement glimmered in her eyes. That's good, right? Yes, very good. He hesitated, then added in a gentle tone, I want you to know there's a real chance you could get this scholarship. Just keep at it. Her chest tightened with gratitude, though she also recalled her rent looming. The scholarship was her big hope for a stable path, if only she could survive in the meantime. She swallowed the knot of worry. Thank you. I'm giving it everything I've got. They fell into a comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, a car horn blared, and a cluster of teenagers ambled past the window. Julian cleared his throat. Have you found any other help, sponsorship, or job opportunities in the design world? She shook her head, a flicker of shame crossing her features. I've asked around a bit, but no real luck yet. Most boutiques want established designers, or they want me to volunteer free labor, and I can't afford that. She cast a glance at the cafe's scuffed floor. I mean, if I don't earn money, I can't even keep my apartment. Concern shadowed Julian's eyes. I'm sorry, that must be stressful, especially with your scholarship deadline so near. Delia nodded, summoning a half smile. I'll manage. It's just life, you know? She tried to shrug it off, but a layer of vulnerability glinted through her stoic mask. He studied her, an internal debate flickering in his mind. He'd always been careful not to overstep boundaries. Yet seeing her shoulders weighed down by the daily struggle, a protective urge took hold. "I know it's not easy," he said gently. Then, cautiously, "If there's ever something I can do, like a recommendation, or even a small loan." Her eyes shot up wide with surprise. "Oh no, I can't." She fumbled, cheeks flushing. "I appreciate it, but I can't borrow money from you. We barely know each other, and I couldn't pay you back anytime soon." He raised a hand in a soothing gesture, voice calm. "I understand. I'm not offended if you say no. I just wanted to put it out there in case, because I see how hard you're working, and I believe in your potential." He paused. "I'm not trying to throw my wealth around. I just know how many doors can slam shut when money's tight." She bit her lip. The sincerity in his tone was disarming. Still, her pride and fear of owing a wealthy stranger kept her from accepting. "Thank you, truly, but I've gotten by so far. I'll figure something out." She exhaled softly. "I'm sorry if that's ungrateful." "Stop," he said, a faint smile curving his lips. "I respect your decision. Just know the offer stands." Warmth spread through her chest. She never expected a man of his stature to understand, let alone offer help. Even if she couldn't accept, the gesture itself felt like a lifeline of moral support. "Thank you," she whispered again. Glancing at the cafe clock, Delia winced. Her break was nearly over. She stood, smoothing her apron. "I have to get back to work, but thanks for the coffee chat." Julian rose as well, retrieving his wallet to settle the bill. "It was good talking to you. Maybe I'll stop by again soon, and don't hesitate to call if there's anything—" He broke off, realizing he'd never given her his number. "Ah, if you'd like my contact info." He pulled a sleek business card from his pocket. She stared at the embossed DuPont Enterprises logo, hesitating. Then she gingerly took it. Thanks. I'll keep it safe." He nodded, sliding on his jacket. "Take care, Delia." She managed a nervous wave as he left, feeling the curious stares of a few patrons who had overheard fragments of their conversation. Once the door closed behind him, she pressed the business card against her chest for a moment, heart hammering. This entire encounter felt surreal. She buried the card in her pocket and rushed to the back to retie her apron. As she poured coffee for the next customer, her thoughts churned. Rent was due Monday. If she didn't scrape enough together, she'd face eviction. Julian's offer lingered in her mind, tempting yet terrifying. But was she truly ready to cross that line? Julian's driver navigated the city streets as he sat quietly in the back seat. Yes, he could have driven himself, but after leaving the cafe he had business calls to return and time was of the essence. He stared at passing storefronts, half listening to an associate drone about a real estate deal. His mind kept flicking back to Delia's face, the way her eyes shone with both hope and quiet desperation. He ended the call with a curt goodbye. A swirl of guilt mingled with concern. Was it right for him to step into her life like this? Perhaps he risked patronizing her, undermining her pride. Yet the thought of her losing her home or giving up her design dreams because of money, it gnawed at him. He sighed, texting Janelle a quick message to rearrange his afternoon schedule. A whisper of an idea was forming, a plan that might help Delia in a non-intrusive way, but he needed to tread carefully. She was no charity case. She was a talented, hard-working person who just needed a door to open. That night, once Delia's shift ended and the cafe lights dimmed, she trudged home. The neon signs of Orchard Row buzzed overhead, painting the wet pavement in electric colors. Each step home reminded her of the tiny hallway, the broken faucet, the chipped plaster. What if next week she was forced out? Where would she even go? Her mind conjured a fleeting image. She could text Julian. But no, her pride rejected that notion. She didn't want him to see her as a damsel in distress, and she'd already told him she'd manage on her own. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag heavily on the floor. Her dress form stood sentinel in the corner, the nearly finished piece a testament to her dogged effort. She placed her palms on either side of the garment, inhaling the faint scent of fabric and starch. Yes, the scholarship was her key. She just had to hold out a little longer. Her phone buzzed again, her boss from the cafe apologetic, saying tomorrow's shift was cut short due to fewer customers than expected. That meant even less pay. She closed her eyes, a small tremor running through her. "Hang in there," she whispered to herself, glancing at the half-finished dress. "Just until next week. I can do this." Days blurred. Delia worked frantically to complete her garment, stitching by the light of a single lamp. She lost sleep and skipped meals to afford color printing of her sketches. The date for the final portfolio submission crept closer, each sunrise bringing a sharper edge of anxiety. Friday dawned gray and cold. She triple-checked the last bead stitch, carefully pressed the dress, and took photos using a borrowed camera from a neighbor. Then, in the afternoon, she braved a slow bus ride across town to the Design Institute. Inside, the building buzzed with activity, other hopefuls dropping off their garments and portfolios. Some carried elaborate gowns swathed in protective garment bags. Others toted laptop presentations. Delia found the submission desk, a single table manned by a bored-looking assistant. Her heart in her throat, she slid over her neatly bound sketches, photo prints, and the carefully bagged dress. I'm here to submit my final pieces," she said softly. The assistant glanced at her name on a roster, nodded, and gave her a slip confirming receipt. "We'll be in touch about the judging schedule," he said dully. "The design gala is on Wednesday night. Winners will be announced at the end." Wednesday, 4 days away. Delia clutched the slip, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. She thanked him and stepped away, shoulders sagging from exhaustion. Now came the worst part: waiting. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian was leaving a meeting with Foundation representatives. The conversation had been interesting. They'd discussed the upcoming design scholarship, the short list of applicants, and how the final decision would be made. Julian had skillfully probed for information, confirming that Delia was indeed in contention, but it all depended on how the panel ranked her compared to other strong applicants. He kept his composure, playing the dispassionate sponsor. Inside, he was urging them to see Delia's promise. He refrained from using the discretionary spot, though it hovered in the back of his mind. He wanted Delia to succeed on her own merit first. If fate intervened against her, he'd consider stepping in. Just as he reached the glass exit doors, his phone buzzed. A text from one of his business associates about an urgent contract. He pressed his lips together, the old stress of corporate duty creeping back. But overshadowing it was the image of Delia's determined face. Wednesday. That was the gala. He made a mental note to clear his schedule that night, ensuring he'd witness the final results in person. Stepping out onto the street, he surveyed the city skyline. So many stories, so many lives intersecting. Delia's had unexpectedly woven into his, stirring something he couldn't name. With a deep breath, he signaled his driver to bring the car around. The days ahead might prove pivotal for both of them. Friday evening, Delia trudged home in the rain, empty-handed and uncertain. Her apartment was cold. The power had flickered earlier and she worried about an unpaid balance. She lit a small lamp, trying not to dwell on the hollow ache in her stomach. Then came a new message. Reminder, your rent is due Monday. The words glowed on her phone's screen like a threat. She sank onto her mattress, tears pricking at her eyes. Monday was in 3 days, and she was short. The scholarship results wouldn't come until Wednesday. Even if she won, that wouldn't help her pay rent on time. For a moment, her gaze landed on Julian's business card, resting under a chipped coaster. She picked it up, thumb tracing the embossed letters. A swirl of conflicting emotions tumbled in her heart. Gratitude, shame, desperation. He'd offered help. He'd said she could call. But what would he think if she reached out just to beg for money? No, she told herself, blinking back tears. She'd find another way. She shoved the card in a drawer, burying it beneath scraps of old lace. Her pride refused to let her text him. Besides, maybe she could ask her manager for an advance, though her instincts said that was a dead end. Or perhaps she'd find some last-minute gig tomorrow. She lay down, listening to the drip of water from the corner of the ceiling where a slow leak had begun. Monday was coming. So was Wednesday. Between them lay a chasm that could determine everything. Her home, her future, her dream. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the weight of uncertainty that pressed her deeper into the thin mattress. Through restless hours, she clung to one truth. She'd done her best with the design. She'd delivered her dream garment. Now she could only hope that was enough to tip fate's scales in her favor, and maybe, just maybe, not lose her footing in the process. Saturday arrived beneath a pall of overcast skies. Delia awoke early, partly from habit, partly from anxiety. She'd planned to visit a local craft fair in hopes of selling some handmade brooches or hair accessories she'd once dabbled in creating. A desperate long shot, but she clung to any possibility to earn fast cash for rent. Her tiny apartment felt colder than ever. A dripping leak in the corner still threatened the bucket she'd placed to catch water. She wrapped herself in a thin cardigan, counting coins in a small tin, the sum of her tips and a bit of leftover change. Even if she sold a few items at the craft fair, it likely wouldn't be enough to cover Monday's rent. But she had to try. She stuffed her modest display, some crocheted hair clips and beaded pins, into a tote bag, then set off. Outside, a chilly breeze swept through the streets. The stall fee at the craft fair was minimal, but still an expense. Delia arrived in the open-air lot where vendors displayed colorful wares beneath makeshift tents. The hum of conversation and laughter echoed, giving a festive air. Families wandered from booth to booth, sampling homemade pastries, admiring pottery, or flipping through vintage clothes. Finding a vacant spot, Delia paid the small fee, set up a tiny table, and arranged her accessories. Each piece had cost her late nights to create, using leftover beads and scraps of ribbon. She waited, stomach tight, hoping passers-by would pause. Maybe someone needed a cheap but pretty accessory. Hours passed. A few people glanced at her display. Some complimented the craftsmanship, but sales were scant. She sold 2 small brooches for a handful of coins. Trying not to lose heart, she forced a polite smile each time. Eventually the sky darkened, threatening rain. She packed up, total earnings pitifully short of what she owed for rent. At her wits' end, she strolled through the fair's closing booths, eyes drifting from a candle vendor to a father comforting a wailing toddler. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. She fished it out, anticipating another landlord reminder. Instead, she saw a message from her old friend Marta, who occasionally sent sewing referrals. Delia, my neighbor needs an emergency dress fix for tomorrow. Wedding. Will pay well if you can come now. Interested? Delia's heart soared. She dashed behind a tent to quickly text back. Yes, please, where and when? Marta shot back an address in a nicer neighborhood across the city. And ASAP, she's panicking. Torn seam on a bridesmaid gown. Delia nearly cried with relief. This might be her miracle. She didn't have enough for a taxi, so she'd have to hustle by bus and foot, but time was money. Hugging her tote, she half ran from the fairgrounds. Maybe tonight she could salvage her rent predicament after all. Julian DuPont paced his penthouse living room, the city lights twinkling through panoramic windows. He was on a conference call with overseas associates, an important project that demanded his usual cool-headed business acumen. Yet he found his focus wandering, mind drifting to Delia and her silent battles. Over the last few days, he gently inquired with the scholarship panel, confirming that Delia's final submission had arrived. One professor had praised her resourcefulness again. Julian had smiled at that, though the conversation soon turned to other promising candidates. When the conference call ended, he closed his laptop, restlessness gnawing at him. He wondered how she was faring. Did she manage to pay rent? Was she all right? Their cafe conversation replayed in his head, her polite but firm refusal of any monetary help. In that moment, he'd admired her pride, yet worried it might stand in the way of a practical solution. Sighing, he moved to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water, a small attempt to placate the uneasy stir in his gut. Days remained until the design gala. He yearned to see how events would unfold but hated waiting passively. Part of him wanted to check on her, but sending a direct message felt invasive. She'd reached no sign of acceptance yet, and no sign she'd changed her mind. Staring out at the glittering skyline, he resolved to be patient. Wednesday would come soon enough. If the scholarship panel did their job fairly, Delia might get her shot at a new life, without him interfering, but if they didn't, he set the bottle down with a firm click. Decision made. If they didn't, he'd do everything in his power to ensure her talent wasn't lost. One way or another, he wouldn't stand idly by. Delia arrived at the neighbor's apartment Marta had mentioned well after sunset, breathless from racing up 2 flights of stairs. A frazzled-looking woman in a silk robe answered the door, beckoning Delia into a living room cluttered with wedding prep chaos, flowers, half-packed gift bags, and a deep green bridesmaid dress draped over a chair. "Thank goodness you're here," the woman breathed. "I'm Lucy. My sister's wedding is tomorrow, and this dress—" She lifted the garment, revealing a gash along the side seam. "I tried to fix it myself and made it worse." Delia gently examined the tear, noticing that the delicate chiffon needed careful restitching to keep the fabric from fraying. She exhaled. This was complex, but doable. "I'll need to reinforce with matching thread and a hidden stitch," she explained. "Do you have the same thread color?" Lucy shook her head, pointing to a small spool that didn't match perfectly. Delia pressed her lips. "I can try a local all-night convenience store for a closer color," she murmured. "But it might not be exact. Unless I have a trick." She rummaged in her bag, pulling out a near-empty spool of neutral chiffon thread from her older projects. It wasn't perfect, but if she carefully blended it with the existing spool, it could pass. Lucy hovered, wringing her hands. "I'll pay you well, I promise. Just please, can you fix it by morning? The wedding is at noon and I'm supposed to be in every photo." Delia assured her she'd do her best. The woman offered her the living room sofa, tea, and the promise of immediate cash payment if she succeeded. Delia tucked away her exhaustion, mustering focus. She set up a small sewing station on the coffee table, referencing a few techniques for chiffon tiers. Hour by hour, she carefully realigned the frayed edges, smoothing them with an iron Lucy provided, stitching tiny overlapping threads to camouflage the tear. The hush of the apartment enveloped her as Lucy dozed in a nearby armchair, occasionally stirring with anxious glances. Around 3 a.m., Delia knotted the final thread. She inspected the seam in the lamplight, smoothing the chiffon to ensure no puckers. It wasn't flawless. Nothing could make a severe rip vanish completely, but it was near invisible without close scrutiny. She let out a long, relieved breath. Lucy sprang awake at the soft click of Delia's scissors. She rushed over, eyes wide. Delia held the dress up for inspection. "It's stable now," she whispered, fingertips smoothing the delicate fabric. "Be gentle, of course, but it should hold through the ceremony and photos." Tears welled in Lucy's eyes. "Oh my God, thank you. You saved me. This is perfect." She scurried to grab her wallet, then handed Delia a wad of cash. "Is this enough? Really? Take it. Your work is worth every penny." Delia counted the bills, her heart flipping. It was more than she'd expected, enough to cover rent if she combined it with her meager savings. She nearly cried from relief. "It's more than fair," she said shakily. "Thank you so much." Lucy hugged her, then insisted Delia rest on the sofa for the night instead of traveling in the pre-dawn darkness. Delia nodded, overcome with gratitude. At last she lay down, the tension in her muscles unwinding. With Monday's rent crisis seemingly solved, hope seeped back into her exhausted mind. Sunday morning, Delia woke to the smell of coffee. Lucy ushered her to the small kitchen and offered breakfast, which Delia accepted with quiet gratitude. After ensuring the dress was neatly packed for Lucy's departure, Delia said her goodbyes and lugged her sewing supplies down the stairs. Outside, a crisp breeze stirred her hair as she walked to the bus stop, the envelope of cash pressed securely against her chest. Even the rattle of the old bus felt lighter today. She was going to pay her rent. She might even afford groceries for the week. And after Wednesday's design gala, who knew? Maybe her future would finally unlock. She arrived at her apartment building around midday, climbing the steps 2 at a time. Her landlady's door was slightly ajar. Delia knocked, exhaling relief. "Here's the rent," she announced, holding out the neatly counted sum. The landlady scanned the bills, gave a curt nod, and mumbled something about next month. Delia bowed politely and hurried back to her own door, a quiet thrill bubbling in her chest. Inside, she placed her sewing bag in the corner. The half-empty fridge reminded her of her next priority, buying a little food. But she had enough to manage that now. She flopped onto her mattress, letting a rare moment of contentment wash over her. The scholarship results were still unknown, but for the first time in months, she wasn't teetering on eviction. A wave of exhaustion hit and she dozed off, arms curled around a throw pillow. Julian spent Sunday dealing with a different sort of chaos. A meeting with an international tech startup that DuPont Enterprises considered acquiring. His day was full of presentations, negotiations, and a working lunch. Yet, he found himself checking his phone repeatedly, half expecting some message from Delia. Nothing came. He tried to stifle the twinge of disappointment. She had her pride, after all. Late that evening, he strolled through his penthouse, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Next to the fireplace mantel lay a stack of portfolio summaries from the Design Institute, brief glimpses of various scholarship hopefuls. He skimmed them again, spotting mention of Delia's name. Officially, her final piece had scored a high rating for creativity under resource constraints. Another candidate had praised technical mastery but less originality. And so on. He closed the file. Despite the positive buzz, the competition was fierce. He recalled the discretionary option. If the official judges snubbed her, he'd use that card. But a spark of hope told him she might rank on her own. Either way, Wednesday's gala would decide it. Julian took a slow sip, letting the city lights twinkle across the windows. Just a few more days. Monday arrived, and Delia woke feeling lighter, even though her old alarm clock beeped shrilly. Paying rent on time had eased a constant weight in her chest. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her fridge was still sparse, but she had enough money to buy some staples, and she still had a small shift at the cafe later, guaranteeing a trickle of income. She couldn't help but glance at her phone, a habit formed out of dread for overdue notices. Instead, she found a message from the Design Institute. Reminder, annual design gala on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Formal attire. Scholarship winners announced. RSVP requested. Nerves fluttered in her stomach. She'd never attended a formal gala. What was she supposed to wear? She had no evening gown for herself. She'd poured every resource into the scholarship piece. A quick mental check told her she had 0 nice dresses to put on. But she'd figure it out. Maybe a borrowed black dress from a friend. She typed a polite RSVP, her heart pounding. That same day, after a shorter cafe shift, she swung by a thrift store, rummaging the racks for something halfway decent. Most dresses were out of style or ill-fitting, but she snagged a simple black sheath with a minor tear at the waist seam. She could fix that easily. The garment cost a few dollars, money she could just manage after groceries. Despite her anxiety, A buzz of excitement radiated from her chest. She was really going to that gala. Tuesday flew by in a blur. Delia patched the thrifted black dress, hemmed it to a more flattering length, and carefully laundered it. She also revisited her final design photos, verifying that everything was labeled correctly. Since the official judging was behind closed doors, she could only hope the panel recognized her efforts. She felt as though her entire future hinged on that decision. Meanwhile, Julian spent Tuesday finalizing a slew of meetings so he could clear Wednesday evening. His staff teased him lightly. He usually avoided these kinds of social receptions unless they involved high-stakes networking. But he insisted, feigning a keen interest in the scholarship program for DuPont Foundation's sake. Few questioned it. Philanthropy was part of the DuPont brand. Yet inside him simmered a personal anticipation. He wanted to see Delia's reaction if or when she triumphed. Wednesday arrived at last. Delia's nerves were so taut that she barely ate breakfast. She spent the morning tidying her apartment, trying to calm her racing heart. In the afternoon, she got dressed in the black sheath, pinned up her hair, and dabbed on light makeup gleaned from a friend's half-used cosmetics. The result wasn't glamorous, but it was the best she could manage. She clutched a small purse, containing her phone, bus fare, and a note with the gala's address, then set off. Although the building hosting the event wasn't far, she worried about the risk of rain damaging her hair or the cheap fabric. She arrived at the bus stop with minutes to spare, heart pounding. To her relief, the bus was on time, though crowded. She stood awkwardly, trying not to wrinkle her dress. When she reached the gala venue, a stately old theater hall rented by the Institute, her breath caught. People in elegant attire milled outside, forming groups of well-dressed students, instructors, and guests. Glittering gowns and sharp suits abounded. Her black thrifted dress felt glaringly plain, but there was no turning back. Stepping inside, Delia took in the soaring ceilings, golden light fixtures, and tasteful decor. Soft music played as waiters wove through the crowd, offering canapés. She spotted a few instructors from the workshop, some scholarship hopefuls whose outfits looked expensive and polished. Her pulse kicked up. "Delia, over here!" a voice called. She turned to see the pink-haired student who'd kindly shown her the Institute's studio lab before. They exchanged smiles. "Looking good," the girl said, giving Delia's black dress a once-over. "Are you excited?" Terrified was more accurate, but Delia forced a brave nod. "Yes, a bit," she admitted. The evening progressed in a haze of introductions and polite chatter. Instructors congratulated each applicant, praising them for their creativity. Delia listened intently to mini-lectures about sustainable fashion, color theory, and upcoming industry trends. Her nerves remained razor-sharp, but she tried to savor the moment. It was a rare glimpse into a world she'd always dreamed of. Midway through, the crowd parted slightly, and she glimpsed Julian entering. Her breath stalled. He cut a refined figure in a tailored dark suit, hair neatly combed, projecting both ease and authority. A swirl of apprehension and relief sparked inside her. He was here, and somehow she felt less alone in this sea of formality. But how would their worlds collide tonight? Julian scanned the throng, soon locking eyes with Delia. A flicker of a smile tugged his lips. He made his way over, weaving past clusters of guests. "Good evening," he greeted softly, gaze taking in her black sheath dress. "You look lovely." Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing the skirt's front. "It's just thrift store fabric, but I did my best." He shook his head. "You carry it with grace. That's what matters." Then his tone grew more hushed. "Nervous?" She gave a tight nod, glancing around at the crowd of polished designers and sponsors. "Just a bit. The announcements. When will they happen?" He checked his watch. "Soon, I believe. The program says they'll present some featured designs, then announce winners. Try to breathe." His voice carried gentle teasing. It's going to be all right. She inhaled, a fragile laugh escaping. I'm trying. Together, they navigated closer to the main stage area. Instructors began ushering the audience to take seats. A hush fell over the hall as the Institute's director stepped on stage, offering an overview of the year's program. Then a series of short videos showcased each top design candidate, including glimpses of Delia's gray crepe dress. She nearly squeaked at the sight of her name appearing on the screen. Finally, the director announced it was time for the scholarship results. We had a panel of industry experts judge the final pieces, he said, voice echoing in the gilded chamber. Their decisions were difficult, but tonight we celebrate 3 outstanding new talents. Delia gripped her seat's armrest, pulse roaring in her ears. Beside her, Julian sat with composed interest, though she sensed tension in his posture. The director opened a sealed envelope. Applause rippled as he named the first scholarship recipient, a bright-eyed girl who specialized in avant-garde knitwear. She ran on stage, nearly in tears. Delia clapped politely, stomach knotting. And our second scholarship winner is... The director paused theatrically. Bryce Miller, with his fusion evening wear line. The slender young man near the front row jumped up, beaming. Another wave of applause. A frisson of alarm coursed through Delia. Only one slot left. She bit her lip so hard it nearly bled. The director cleared his throat. And the final scholarship recipient. Congratulations to... Delia's heart pounded so violently that her vision blurred. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying silently. Samira Ortiz, for her innovative approach to sustainable dyeing. Thunderous applause. On stage, a tall girl with a dazzling tie-dye gown ascended, tears streaming down her face. Delia felt the blood drain from her cheeks. Her mind reeled. Samira Ortiz. Not Delia. She managed to clap numbly, dread seizing her like a clamp around her chest. Next to her, Julian's expression was taut with concern. The 3 scholarship winners lined up for photos, cameras flashing. Delia couldn't move. Her entire world had tilted. Wait, she heard the director say. We also want to mention a special recommendation for Delia Ramos, an applicant whose resourcefulness greatly impressed the panel. While we can't grant her the main scholarship, we encourage her to continue her studies. We see a bright future for her. Let's give Delia a hand, please. A smattering of applause followed. Her name was called, but not in triumph. It was like a consolation prize. She forced her legs to stand, offering a weak wave as people clapped politely. Then she sank down again, tears burning her eyes. Julian placed a light hand on her shoulder. His voice was barely audible above the applause. I'm so sorry, he murmured. They should have chosen you. She swallowed, throat tight, forcing a shaky smile. It's okay, she whispered, though her chest felt hollow. I'm proud to have been recognized at all. She wanted to flee the room, but her feet refused to move. Cameras snapped at the official winners, all beaming in fancy attire. Somewhere in the swirl of heartbreak, Delia recalled the hush of her small apartment, the nights spent pushing her sewing machine to its limits. So many hopes pinned on this. Yet, it was gone, and she remained with only a polite encouragement from the Institute. In the corner of her eye, she saw Julian's jaw flex. He looked torn, perhaps wrestling with his own thoughts. The ceremony wound down, guests rising to mingle and congratulate the winners. Delia's mind buzzed with impulses to run out the door, yet she didn't want to cause a scene. The Institute staff, smiling, approached to offer her thanks for participating, praising her creativity. She nodded numbly, giving short answers. After enduring a few more minutes of small talk, she ducked away to a quieter side of the hall, fighting tears. Julian followed discreetly. Delia, he said softly, stepping close. You deserved better. I'm certain your design was scholarship-worthy. She shook her head, voice trembling. It's fine. 3 people beat me fairly. They earned it. His eyes darkened. It may not be so simple, Sometimes panel decisions involve more than just raw talent. Politics, prior relationships, who knows? His words carried a note of anger, but he tried to sound soothing. Look, there's another option. The Foundation has discretionary power. Her brow furrowed. You mean, you could override the panel, but that wouldn't be fair to the others? Or would it cause controversy? The swirl of confusion threatened to overwhelm her. Julian hesitated. We can grant one special scholarship. It's in the agreement, but I need to be absolutely sure you're okay with it. I didn't want to use it unless necessary, but... Delia's breath caught. She pictured stepping onto that stage, after all, singled out by Julian's influence. Would that cheapen her achievement? Would people see her as a pity case? Her chest clenched, tears stinging. I don't know if I can handle that, she whispered. It might look like favoritism or charity. Everyone would think I only got it because I know you. His expression was pained. If you call it off, you walk away empty-handed, despite your talent. Is that more acceptable? You poured your heart into this. You deserve recognition and real support to grow. She glanced around the bustling gala, the winners still posing for photos, the crowd swirling with excitement. A mix of pride and despair tangled in her heart. She'd yearned for a fair contest, to prove her worth on her own terms. Now she stood at a crossroads. Accept help and risk the stigma, or decline and remain locked out of the door she almost opened. I don't know, she breathed shakily. I need time to think. He nodded, stepping back respectfully. Take that time, he said, voice gentle. But you should know, I can't guarantee how long the Foundation Board will keep that slot open. It was meant for extenuating circumstances. If we wait too long, the Institute might move on. She closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill. I understand. A hush settled between them, punctuated by the distant clink of glasses and murmured congratulations floating through the air. Julian placed a light hand on her arm. Let's get some fresh air, he suggested. You don't need to stand here feeling cornered. Come on. She nodded, hardly trusting her voice, and let him guide her toward an exit. The path was already chosen, in a way. Her best chance lay in that discretionary scholarship. But the weight of accepting felt heavier than she'd ever imagined. Outside the gala's side entrance, a crisp night breeze rustled Delia's dress. The grandeur of the event hall loomed behind her, music and chatter muffled by the thick doors. She drew in a shaky breath, trying to steady her emotions. Nearby, Julian lingered with quiet concern, giving her space. A soft glow from a lamppost revealed the turmoil on her face, eyes red-rimmed, cheeks pale. She tried to mask her disappointment, yet her slumped shoulders spoke volumes. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the city's hum threading between them. You want to walk a bit? Julian finally asked. Delia nodded, grateful for the suggestion. Anything to escape the humiliating swirl of half-sympathetic stares inside. She clutched her small handbag, and they strolled down a wide walkway that wrapped around the building, passing neatly trimmed hedges and a quiet fountain. Far above, stars flickered in a clear sky, too distant to offer comfort. They walked slowly, each lost in thought. Delia's mind replayed the scholarship announcement again and again, hearing someone else's name where she'd hoped for her own. It was all she could do not to break down. She was so tired of scraping by, tired of near misses. Delia, Julian said softly, drawing her attention back to him. I know tonight was painful, but you must remember how close you came. You impressed them. Even the director made a special note of you. She forced a weak smile. I know, and I'm grateful for that. It's just... Her voice trembled. That scholarship was my best chance at formal training, connections, some financial relief, everything. He studied her, sympathy etched into his gaze. I'm sorry. I wish I could change the outcome. Then, gently, he ventured, but there's still my foundation's discretionary scholarship. It's not an override exactly, just an option the board reserves for exceptional cases. She looked away, hugging her arms. Her pride warred with her desperation. If I accept that, everyone will think I only got it through you, that I couldn't earn it on my own. Would that be so terrible? He asked quietly. They'll see your work eventually, see you deserve it, and if it gives you a start, does it matter how the door opened? It does to me, she said, voice quivering. I fought my whole life to stand on my own. I don't want people assuming I seduced a rich sponsor or took a shortcut. I'm not saying you do that, but people gossip. He sighed, nodding slowly. I understand. Reputation is everything. But let me ask you this. Would refusing help change your talent? Does it erase the fact that you poured heart and soul into your designs? She blinked, uncertain. No, it doesn't. Exactly. Your skill is still yours. The scholarship, any scholarship, is just a means to grow. But if you'd rather not touch it, I won't force the matter. He paused, pain flickering in his eyes. I only want to see your dreams get a fair chance. She gazed at him, heart aching with gratitude and confusion. Thank you, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. I need to think about it, at least overnight. Can I do that? He offered a small nod, voice gentle. Of course. Take the time you need. I'll talk to the foundation board. Make sure the discretionary spot is still available, but I can't guarantee they'll hold it long. The Institute is closing out final rosters soon. They reached the fountain at the corner of the lawn, water trickling softly into a basin. Delia watched its ripples, feeling as though her life were equally adrift. She sensed Julian's quiet presence beside her, a comforting steadiness amid her swirling doubts. How will this even work? She asked at last. If I accept it, would I have to sign something? Start classes right away? The thought is exciting but terrifying. He managed a small smile. The details can be ironed out. In essence, the foundation would cover your tuition and a modest stipend, less than the main scholarship, but enough to get by. You'd also have access to the Institute's resources. It's not a free ride, though. You'd be expected to maintain good standing, pass your courses, and produce a final collection. Her heart fluttered, imagining that possibility, studying under real professionals, learning advanced techniques, building an actual portfolio. That sounds incredible, she admitted, but I don't want to jump from one debt to another or owe you personally. You wouldn't owe me anything, he reassured her gently. The foundation is a separate entity. Yes, I run it, but funds come from the organization. You'd be just another scholarship recipient. If it helps, you can pretend I have nothing to do with it. She laughed weakly, tears brightening her eyes. That might be hard to pretend, she murmured. Silence stretched, the fountain's steady murmur filling the space. At length, she swallowed. I'll let you know tomorrow, she decided. I just need to think alone, sort out my feelings. His expression eased into understanding. Take your time, he repeated, offering his hand lightly as if to steady her. She hesitated, then clasped it, taking a breath that quivered with the release of pent-up tension. Together they turned back toward the gala doors, finding the crowd starting to disperse. The official program had ended, leaving pockets of students, staff, and donors chatting. Delia's eyes darted to the 3 scholarship winners receiving congratulations. A pang of envy sliced her heart, but she tried to swallow it down. Julian escorted her gently to the coat check area, where she retrieved her threadbare shawl. In the background, the Institute's director caught sight of Julian, waved politely, then turned away, seemingly absorbed in conversation. Delia felt a pang. Clearly, the Institute was focused on their official winners now. Do you need a ride home? Julian asked softly, glancing at the thinning crowd. Yes, but... She trailed off, anxiety prickling her. She hardly had money for a taxi, but the thought of calling him for a driver again stirred her pride. If it's not too much trouble, that'd be nice. It's not a problem at all, he said firmly. Let's go. They didn't speak as they walked across the venue's marble foyer and down the steps to the curb. The air felt colder, or maybe that was just Delia's sinking mood. She followed him to a parked sedan, a different one from before, sleeker, with tinted windows. He opened the passenger door for her. She murmured thanks and settled in, hugging her arms. Once he slid into the driver's seat, the engine hummed to life, and they pulled away from the event hall. Delia stared out the window at passing streetlights, neon signs flickering in the distance, countless lives proceeding as usual while hers wavered on a razor's edge. "Do you want to talk, or would you rather I give you space?" Julian asked gently. She sighed, wrapping her shawl tighter. Maybe space for now." He nodded, keeping his gaze on the road. They drove in companionable silence. A swirl of emotions roiled in her chest, relief that she wasn't walking home alone, sorrow at missing the official scholarship, apprehension about the discretionary offer, and a trace of comfort in Julian's respectful presence. As they neared her neighborhood, the buildings grew shabbier, the sidewalks cracked. Delia's heart clenched. She always felt self-conscious, showing him her reality. At an intersection, they halted for a red light. Her phone vibrated in her purse. She fished it out, expecting some ad or random alert. Instead, she saw an unknown number. "Hey, it's Lucy. The bridesmaid dress you fixed was perfect. Everyone admired it. I told them about you. Maybe more gigs soon. You're a lifesaver." Delia's lips parted in a brief smile, warmth flooding her. "Thank you," she typed quickly in reply. "So glad it worked out." She set the phone down, glancing sidelong at Julian. He was focused on the traffic light, but his expression softened when he noticed her small smile. "Good news?" "Just a client from the weekend," she explained. "Her dress fix went well, and she might refer me to others." A gentle curve touched his mouth. "That's wonderful. See? Your talent speaks for itself." They rounded the final corner, pulling up in front of her building. The dimly lit facade loomed, unwelcoming. Delia exhaled, bracing for the climb up those worn stairs. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly, unfastening her seatbelt. "And everything else." He turned off the engine, twisting slightly to face her. "It's the least I could do," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Listen, about tomorrow. Whenever you decide, text or call me. Day or night." She nodded, rummaging in her small handbag for the battered phone. "Okay," she promised, her throat tight. Part of her wanted to reject the discretionary scholarship, maintain her pride. Another part screamed that she'd be foolish to turn it down. "Good night, Delia," he said, eyes earnest. "No matter what happens, I'm in your corner." Tears prickled again. She mustered a brave smile, stepping out into the cold. "Good night." The door closed softly behind her. She turned, watching him drive off, the tail lights fading into the gloom. Silence enveloped her. In the distance, a car alarm wailed, and faint laughter drifted from a nearby alley. Life went on, indifferent to her turmoil. Entering the building, she trudged up the stairs to her apartment. The echo of Julian's words followed her. "I'm in your corner." It felt both comforting and perilous, as if forging a deeper bond with him could unravel her carefully guarded independence. Yet how could she cling to independence alone if the world kept slamming doors? She reached her door, exhaled shakily, and let herself in. The persistent drip of water from the ceiling greeted her, along with the stale chill of an underheated apartment. Stripping off her thrifted black dress, she slipped into an old nightshirt, then curled up on her bed, the city's distant roar a steady lull. Over and over she debated the pros and cons of the discretionary scholarship. Pride versus opportunity. Fairness versus survival. Eventually exhaustion won, and she dozed off, mind circling around the same question like a moth around a flickering bulb. If she said yes, she might face whispers of favoritism, but she'd also finally have a real path into the design world. If she said no, she could keep her pride intact, but risk remaining trapped, forever an outsider tapping on the window of her dreams. Which path would she take? Morning light slipped through the crooked blinds of Delia's apartment, rousing her from a fitful sleep. She lay still, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The events of the gala flooded back, and with them, the question she'd wrestled with all night. Should she accept Julian's offer, or rather the foundation's discretionary scholarship? She sat up slowly, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. Her reflection in the small mirror propped on a rickety dresser showed dark circles under her eyes, a testament to her restless night. She splashed her face with water from the bathroom sink, the faucet sputtering in its usual fashion. Even as exhaustion clung to her, she sensed a current of determination building. One way or another, she had to decide. After dressing in her usual jeans and a worn blouse, she gathered her phone, paced the length of the apartment, and deliberated typing out a text. The blank message screen to Julian stared back. She closed it again, heart clenching. Maybe a walk would clear her head. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with its typical mid-morning rhythm. Delivery trucks rumbling, neighbors exchanging greetings, a few children chasing each other around the cracked sidewalk. Delia headed toward a small park a couple of blocks away, the same place she sometimes visited when her thoughts felt too heavy. The park's grass was sparse, the benches chipped, but a few tall trees offered a modest canopy. She chose a worn wooden seat under the largest oak, hugging her purse in her lap. A chilly breeze rustled the leaves, bringing the faint scent of car exhaust from a nearby intersection. Her mind churned through possibilities. Accept the discretionary scholarship, risk rumors, but gain immediate entry into the program. Refuse it, maintain personal pride, but lose invaluable training. She recalled the professor's words at the gala, how they'd praised her creativity. The normal scholarship might have been just out of reach for any number of reasons: limited spots, advanced competition, or a desire from the panel to diversify. Yet now she had a second chance. A mother strolled past, guiding a wobbly toddler. The child spotted a small bird hopping near a bush and squealed with delight. Delia managed a faint smile. Would she also find delight if she dared to accept help? "Morning," called a cheerful voice. Delia glanced up to see one of her neighbors, Mrs. Elwood, cradling a cat in her arms. The older woman offered a nod. "You're up early, dear." "Yeah," Delia murmured, forcing a polite wave. "Just thinking?" Mrs. Elwood smiled, shifting the cat's weight. "Thinking can be good. Or heavy." She cocked her head. "Which is it for you today?" Delia hesitated, unsure if she wanted to spill personal struggles. But Mrs. Elwood's gentle tone prodded her. "A bit heavy," she admitted, trying to decide whether to take an opportunity that might be controversial. The older woman studied her with mild curiosity. "Well, don't let other folks' opinions steal your blessings. If you believe it's right, go for it. Sometimes we have to accept help to move forward in life." Delia's eyes stung with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Mrs. Elwood nodded, then continued on her way, her cat peeking over her shoulder. Alone again, Delia breathed deeply, letting the words resonate. "Don't let other folks' opinions steal your blessings." It felt like a quiet sign, a nudge to seize the hand extended. She checked her phone again. No new messages. Julian was giving her space. Her fingers hovered over the keypad before she finally typed, "Hi, Julian. I'm ready to talk about the scholarship. Could we meet today?" Her thumb hesitated over the send button, heart pounding. Then, with a final breath, she pressed it. The message whooshed away. She stared at the screen, half expecting an instant reply. When none arrived immediately, she tucked the phone away, deciding to return home. Perhaps she'd set aside pride once and for all. Julian paced his office at DuPont Enterprises, glancing at the screen of his phone for the 100th time. The foundation board meeting was in an hour, and he planned to bring up the discretionary scholarship. He had plenty of sway, but not absolute control. Other board members demanded justification. He couldn't simply decree Delia's acceptance. He needed a logical argument, her talent, her dedication, the special mention from the Institute. It was all valid, but he also wanted her consent, not some arrangement imposed against her will. A beep signaled a new message. He lunged for his phone. Seeing Delia's name on the notification, relief and a little thrill shot through him. He opened it. "Hi, Julian. I'm ready to talk about the scholarship. Could we meet today?" He exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. Immediately he typed back, "Absolutely. I have a board meeting soon. Could we meet late afternoon? Perhaps at the West Side coffee shop?" He hit send, then resumed pacing. A minute later, her reply came, "Yes, that works. See you around 4 p.m. Thank you." A slight smile curved his lips. He informed Janelle to clear an hour in the late afternoon. This was happening. One step closer to ensuring Delia's talent found a real outlet. 4 p.m. found Delia slipping into a modest, modern coffee shop near the West Side Business District. The aroma of espresso hung in the air, and large windows overlooked a busy street. She brushed nervous sweat from her palms, scanning for Julian. He sat at a small corner table, dressed more casually than usual, still polished but without a tie. Meeting her halfway, he rose, offering a calm smile. "Delia," he greeted. "Thanks for coming." She slid into the seat opposite him, heart fluttering. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly. A server appeared, and they hastily ordered coffees, hers a simple latte, his an Americano. Once the server retreated, silence settled between them, charged with expectancy. "Well," Julian began, leaning forward, "I appreciate you reaching out. How are you feeling?" She stared at her hands, then forced her gaze up. "Still disappointed about the main scholarship, but I'm leaning toward accepting the foundation's offer." The admission tasted bittersweet. "If it's still an option, that is." Relief flickered in his eyes. "It is. In fact, I had a foundation board meeting earlier today. I laid out my case for why we should grant a discretionary scholarship. They were receptive." He paused, gauging her reaction. "They'll need your final confirmation soon so paperwork can be filed." Her stomach twisted. "Then consider this my confirmation," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. "I accept." A small smile broke across his face. "That's wonderful. I'm truly happy." Then he sobered. "But I want you to understand, this doesn't mean I'm swooping in to rescue you. It just means the board agrees you deserve a chance. The rest is on you, your work ethic, your talent." She nodded fervently. "I know, and I'll work hard. I promise." Their coffees arrived, interrupting the moment. Delia thanked the server, hands unsteady as she lifted the mug. After a bracing sip, she asked, "So, how does this process start? Do I sign a contract?" He chuckled. "Yes, it's formal. The Foundation's legal counsel will draw up papers covering tuition, a small living stipend, and the requirement to maintain certain grades. Typically, you'd meet with the Institute coordinator, choose a study track, and start next semester, which begins in about 6 weeks. She blinked, her chest filling with excitement and nerves. 6 weeks, she echoed. That's soon, but okay, I can manage. He leaned back, sipping his Americano, studying her with a mixture of calm and warmth. You'll do great. I can connect you with a counselor at the Institute to help plan your course schedule. They'll talk about technique classes, design theory, maybe some business units. She bobbed her head, the scope of it all overwhelming yet thrilling. I've dreamed of learning advanced pattern making and draping, and more about fabrics, really understanding the craft. Now you will. He smiled gently. They fell silent again, letting the weight of this decision settle. Delia realized with a surge of gratitude that she was on the cusp of a new era, one with possibilities she could scarcely imagine. Yet a small voice nagged at her. "Julian," she said softly, "are you sure this won't cause rumors? People might say you pulled strings for me like I didn't earn it." His expression turned serious. "Rumors may arise. But the board voted. It wasn't just me. And in time your work will speak for itself. If anyone questions your worthiness, they can see your designs." She swallowed a lump in her throat, nodding. "Okay, I just want to do this right." His voice gentled. "I know. But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting help. And I'm genuinely convinced you're the best candidate for that discretionary slot." She stared at him, gratitude bursting inside her. Over the weeks he'd shown kindness, respect for her craft, and faith that she could succeed. Tears prickled her eyes, but she willed them away. "Thank you," she whispered. They settled into more practical talk about scheduling. Julian said he'd message her with next steps from the foundation. She shared her phone's email so he could forward any documents. The tension gradually eased, replaced by a cautious excitement. They finished their coffees, content to let normal conversation flow, sharing small anecdotes, joking about how she'd once misread the bus schedule and ended up in the wrong district. When the cups were empty, Julian glanced at his watch. "I need to head back to the office, but I'm relieved we worked this out. You'll officially start next semester. In the meantime, if you'd like to use the Institute's facilities to practice, I can arrange that." Her eyes lit up. "That'd be amazing. My sewing machine at home is so old and my space is cramped." She laughed self-consciously. "Though I might look out of place in those fancy labs." He shook his head. "Not at all. They'll be lucky to have you, and the staff already knows your name. Don't worry." They rose, leaving a tip for the server. Out on the sidewalk, city sounds thrummed around them. Delia felt an odd mixture of euphoria and vulnerability, standing at the cusp of something truly transformative. "Thank you again," she said as they paused by the curb. "I won't forget this." He stepped closer, voice low and earnest. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise to keep designing with that same passion. That's all I ask." Her chest tightened. Without overthinking, she brushed her hand against his in a fleeting gesture of gratitude. "I promise." A faint flush colored his cheeks. Then he hailed a passing taxi for her, despite her protests that she could take the bus. "Please," he insisted, "let me cover it just this once. You have a lot on your mind. A bus ride may not be the best finish to your day." She sighed, smiling softly. "All right?" Then, with a final wave, she slipped into the taxi and told the driver her address. As the vehicle pulled away, she watched Julian in the side mirror. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, until he was lost in the rush of cars. All the way home, Delia's thoughts buzzed with anticipation. She was doing this, enrolling in formal studies, financed by a separate scholarship that might brand her as favored, but would unlock doors she could never open alone. She consoled herself that she hadn't demanded it. An official board had approved it. And anyway, it was time to let her talent bloom beyond the constraints of pride. Stepping into her apartment, she dropped her purse and let out a laugh that was half disbelief. The same dingy walls, the same flickering hallway light. But now they felt like they were on borrowed time. In 6 weeks, she could be studying daily in a real design environment. Maybe move to a better place if her stipend allowed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello, Ms. Ramos. This is the DuPont Foundation. Mr. DuPont informed us you'll be joining as a special scholarship recipient. Could you email us your ID and address for paperwork?" She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. It was real. No turning back. She shot a quick response, then sank onto her bed. The entire arc of her life had shifted in a single afternoon. A whisper of guilt intruded, remembering her fear of being pitied or beholden. But as she gazed at the battered sewing machine in the corner, she thought of Lucy's last-minute dress fix, of rent just barely paid, of the daily strain she lived under. This was her shot and she wouldn't waste it. She rose, rummaging through the battered drawer that held leftover fabric scraps. She pulled out the small lace piece she'd tucked away, a whimsical detail she'd once imagined adding to a personal outfit someday. Perhaps that day had arrived. If she was going to walk into the Institute's labs, she might as well sport something she'd crafted for herself. As she pinned the lace to a section of black linen, her phone vibrated again. Another message from the Foundation with an attached welcome packet, including a note. "We're thrilled to have you on board." A wave of gratitude fluttered through her. She still felt fear. Fear that people would talk, that they'd credit Julian alone. But an even stronger tide of courage washed over that dread. Yes, folks might gossip. But a chance was a chance, and she refused to squander it. Julian had given her a ladder, not a handout. She would climb it, rung by rung, determined to prove she was worthy of every step. That night, in his penthouse, Julian rested in an armchair, scanning through emails. The Foundation's confirmation of Delia's acceptance brought him a rare sense of satisfaction. He pictured the shy grin she wore when she finally said yes. A half-smile tugged at his lips. He snapped his laptop shut, gazing at the city's glittering skyline. Funny, how life had taken a turn he never anticipated. A random meeting with a girl who mistook his car for a rideshare, leading to days of tension, small triumphs, and ultimately, a scholarship. He felt a subtle warmth in his chest, a fulfillment business deals seldom delivered. Whether Delia realized it or not, she'd awakened something within him, a longing to foster genuine talent, to be part of something more real than boardroom triumphs. Sure, he had philanthropic causes galore, but never before had he become so personally invested. And it wasn't just charity. There was admiration for her grit, her refusal to break, her creativity born of scarcity. He admired that more than he could articulate. So if giving her a foothold in the design world meant stepping outside his usual boundaries, so be it. A hint of concern still lurked. He knew that envious whispers might follow her, that his own involvement could muddy waters. But if she succeeded, it would be on her own merits, and time would quiet the rumors. He just hoped the world wouldn't crush her spirit before she could blossom. Setting his glass of water on the side table, Julian switched off the main lights, letting the soft glow of city neon paint the penthouse walls. With a final glance at the night sky, he murmured a silent vow. He'd guide her if needed, but never overshadow her. Because what Delia deserved was the spotlight on her talent, not a backseat ride on his influence. Tomorrow, the real journey began, and he wouldn't miss a step of it. A crisp morning sun spilled across the polished floors of the city's Design Institute, reflecting off freshly cleaned windows. Delia stepped inside, a small quiver of excitement and nerves tightening her stomach. One of the Foundation's coordinators had invited her to tour the facilities, showing her the sewing labs, pattern-making rooms, and fabric library she'd soon have access to. She wore the newly altered blouse she'd decorated with lace, the rest of her outfit simple but neatly pressed. Still, she couldn't entirely quell the whisper in her mind that she didn't belong here, that maybe at any moment someone would realize a mistake and send her away. Yet she reminded herself of the official acceptance email waiting on her phone. She was, at least in the eyes of the Foundation and the Institute, a valid scholarship recipient. A friendly receptionist recognized her name. "Good morning, Delia. Right this way. Ms. Alvarez from the Foundation is waiting in the main lab." "Thank you," Delia replied, following directions down a wide corridor. It was strange retracing steps she'd taken as an outsider, only this time with the knowledge that soon she'd be a bona fide student, an insider. She found Ms. Alvarez in a bright, spacious classroom brimming with sewing machines and large drafting tables. Mannequins stood in neat rows, each dressed in partial toils or pinned muslin. The woman, sharply dressed in a tailored blazer, greeted Delia warmly. "So glad to meet you in person," Ms. Alvarez said, shaking Delia's hand. "Mr. DuPont has spoken highly of you, and of course we've seen your scholarship submission. Let's show you around." They strolled through the main lab, past students who exchanged cheerful banter while working on personal projects. The whir of machines, the hiss of steam irons, the faint smell of new fabric, it was all exhilarating. Delia's eyes widened at the variety of equipment. Modern sewing machines, specialized sergers, digital pattern cutters. She'd only ever used a battered home model. Ms. Alvarez led her into another room lined with shelves of textiles, cotton, silk, wool, synthetics, all arranged by weight and weave. Delia's breath caught at the possibilities. She touched a bolt of satiny material, heart pounding. She'd never had such resources at her fingertips. "We'll go over your schedule options," Ms. Alvarez said, guiding her to a small office where a table was set with pamphlets. "You can select a focus. Some scholarship recipients choose to concentrate on couture sewing, others on costumes, some on ready-to-wear. You've got a real eye for evening dresses, so maybe that's something to consider. But no rush." Delia nodded, flipping through the pamphlets. "I'm still wrapping my mind around having any choice at all," she admitted, voice hushed with amazement. "It's incredible." "I'm glad you think so." The coordinator gave her a kind smile. "We want you to thrive. That's the Foundation's goal. Fostering genuine talent." Delia's phone buzzed. She instinctively checked it, half expecting more Foundation emails. Instead, she saw a text from Julian, a simple question. "How's the tour going?" She felt a wave of warmth. He clearly remembered she was here today and cared enough to ask. She typed back, "It's wonderful, thank you," and slipped her phone away, cheeks faintly flushed. Ms. Alvarez handed Delia a few forms to fill out. Basic enrollment details, emergency contacts, stipend disbursement instructions. Delia's pen paused at the line for mailing address, self-conscious of her old building, but it was the truth. She wrote it quickly, ignoring a jab of insecurity. Before long, they emerged again into the main hallway. "That covers the basics," Ms. Alvarez said. "We'll finalize everything once the new semester begins. Any questions?" Delia cast a final glance at the bustling labs. She itched to dive in already, experiment with industrial-grade machines, glean tips from experienced instructors. "Not right now," she said, voice trembling with excitement. "I'm just overwhelmed, in a good way." "Good. Then rest up, gather your ideas, and we'll see you soon." Ms. Alvarez shook her hand again, a firm, encouraging grip. "Congratulations, Delia." With that, the coordinator left to attend to other duties. Delia stood alone in the corridor, letting the moment sink in. A small laugh of joy bubbled in her throat. 6 weeks from now, she'd walk these hallways as a student, not just a visitor. She took a slow breath, then turned to head outside. The afternoon sunshine felt like a blessing on her skin as she exited the institute. She checked her phone again, that small thrill returning when she saw Julian's name. She considered sending him a quick thanks, or maybe calling, but she didn't want to rely on him for every surge of happiness. Instead, she decided to share the news with her friend Marta first. After all, it was Marta who'd once passed Delia small tailoring gigs. She texted, "I just got an official orientation at the Design Institute. I'm in. It's a scholarship. I'll start next semester." She added a flurry of excited emojis, feeling almost childish but too happy to care. A response came quickly. "What? That's amazing. I knew you'd make it. Celebratory coffee soon? I'm so proud of you." Delia's grin widened. Pocketing her phone, she skipped onto the sidewalk. She had a few hours before her cafe shift, time enough to treat herself to a little stroll, perhaps daydream about her next big design. She had no illusions that the road ahead was easy. She still had bills, still lived in a rundown building, but for once she saw a horizon beyond her usual struggle. Meanwhile, Julian sat in a midday board meeting, half listening to updates on a new tech acquisition. He glanced at his phone under the table, noticing Delia's short reply. "It's wonderful, thank you." A soft smile found its way onto his face, intriguing Janelle, who was seated 2 chairs over, but she tactfully said nothing. He forced his attention back to the meeting, though a contented glow remained in his chest. She was making progress, forging ahead with confidence. That knowledge colored even the driest corporate updates with a spark of satisfaction. When the meeting ended, he hurried to his office, ignoring the usual swirl of staff needing signatures. He typed Delia a quick follow-up. "Glad to hear it went well. Let me know if you need anything. Genuinely anything." Her reply came minutes later. "Will do, thanks again. This is also surreal." He chuckled softly, typing back, "Surreal but well-deserved. Keep me posted." A polite knock on his door signaled the arrival of a senior executive. Julian closed the chat, switching gears to his CEO persona. Yet even as he planned an upcoming pitch, he couldn't quite banish the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, he was part of something deeply worthwhile, and it had nothing to do with profit margins. Days passed, edging closer to Delia's cafe shift changes and her final gig deadlines. She mended a few garments for regulars, earning pocket money for groceries. Knowing that come next semester she'd receive a small stipend filled her with fresh resilience. One evening, she decided to rearrange her apartment, clearing out a corner by the window to better accommodate her sewing machine. She patched the cracks on her rickety desk with duct tape, pinned up her sketches of future designs on the wall, and even hung a small thrifted mirror to reflect more light. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like a personal studio in the making. Late into the night, she worked on a new design concept, a convertible dress with detachable sleeves. The idea blossomed from her new sense of freedom. Why not dream bigger now that she'd soon have the resources to bring ideas to life? She glanced at her phone, tempted to share the sketch with Julian, but decided to wait. Couldn't rely on his constant feedback. She had to stand on her own 2 feet. Remember? Eventually, the day came when she'd arranged to meet an institute advisor to finalize her class schedule. Delia woke early, excited. She wore a simple but neatly mended dress, pinned her hair in a loose bun, and took the bus across town. In the advisor's office, an airy space lined with student portfolios, she found a new wave of nerves. But the advisor, a gentle-voiced man named Rene, put her at ease as they discussed the program's core classes: pattern drafting, sewing techniques, fashion history, plus electives like digital design or costume. Delia's eyes sparkled at each mention. She wanted them all, but she had to be strategic. "Let's focus on the fundamentals first," Rene suggested. "You have raw talent, but formal structure in pattern making and advanced garment construction will elevate your skills faster." She nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, that's exactly what I need. I want to fix any sloppy habits I've developed on my own." Rene chuckled. "Sloppy or inventive? It's all perspective. But sure, let's refine your technique." He printed out a draft schedule, pinned it to a small board on his desk. "You'll attend orientation in 6 weeks. Also, the foundation's stipend disbursement will be monthly so you can manage living expenses. Just keep your grades up, attend classes, complete projects on time." Delia's chest fluttered, the reality sinking in anew. "I promise to give it everything I have." Rene smiled, extending his hand. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ramos." They shook. Delia felt tears prick her eyes, joyful this time, not sorrowful. Outside, the sun shone bright, and she let out a laugh of giddy disbelief. That afternoon, as she walked home, Delia made a detour to the library. She wanted to research advanced draping techniques, maybe watch some videos if the old computers could handle it. As she browsed the shelves, she thought about all the new terms and possibilities that would open up in class. A text from Julian appeared. "Heard from the advisor you finalized your schedule. Congratulations. How do you feel?" She sank onto a library chair, smiling at the screen. "Elated and terrified, but mostly elated," she typed back. "Thank you again." She paused, considering. Then she added, If you're free sometime, I'd like to show you a new sketch I'm working on. His reply came quickly. I'd love that. Whenever you're ready. She hugged the phone to her chest, ignoring the amused glance from a nearby librarian. The following weekend, they arranged to meet at a small art museum, a neutral public space where they could admire exhibits and talk designs without feeling overshadowed by wealth or poverty. Delia dressed in a floral print dress she'd thrifted long ago, altering it to fit better. She carried a sketchbook in her satchel. She found Julian in the museum foyer, studying a large installation piece that resembled a swirl of metal ribbons. Dressed casually in dark jeans and a button-down, he offered a friendly nod. "Hey," he greeted. "Thanks for suggesting this. I've been meaning to see the new exhibit." She smiled back, still a bit shy. "Me too, just never had time or money to spare on tickets. Thanks for offering to cover the entrance fee." He waved off her thanks. "It's minimal, honestly. Don't worry." They wandered through galleries of modern sculpture, discussing shapes and textures. Delia pointed out how certain abstract forms suggested garment drapes to her. Julian, for his part, listened intently, occasionally relating the aesthetics to architecture or product design, fields he knew. It surprised her how easily they found common ground, bridging backgrounds with mutual curiosity. In a quieter alcove, they found benches overlooking a large hanging installation of dyed fabrics, fluttering like a color gradient from ceiling to floor. Delia sank onto a bench, rummaging for her sketchbook. "So, here's that convertible dress idea," she murmured, flipping to a page with rough pencil outlines. Julian leaned in, scanning the sketch. "Detachable sleeves that turn a long-sleeve evening dress into a sleeveless cocktail dress," he read, a smile dawning on his face. "That's genius. Versatile, especially for people who can't buy multiple outfits." She beamed, proud that he grasped her concept. "Exactly. My dream is to serve women who need affordability without sacrificing style." His gaze lifted, admiration clear. "You're thinking practically and creatively. I like it." A flush warmed her cheeks. "Thanks. One day I'll make a prototype in the Institute labs. For now, it's all ideas on paper." They sat quietly, absorbing the soft rustle of the fabric art overhead, each lost in thoughts of future potential. At length, Julian glanced at her. "You realize once you start classes, you'll be busier than ever. Cafe shifts, studies, and hopefully new design gigs. You ready for that pace?" She inhaled, then nodded, a determined spark in her eyes. "I've been busy my whole life. At least now the busyness leads somewhere I truly want to go." He smiled softly, a subtle pride shining through. "You have no idea how inspiring that is." She found herself wanting to hold his hand or express gratitude beyond words, but she also felt the swirl of boundaries. He was her sponsor, a friend, maybe something more she couldn't define yet. So she simply murmured, "I'm grateful for this path, and I'll make it worth everyone's while." He nodded, returning his gaze to the drifting fabric art. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They weren't just bridging worlds of wealth and scarcity, they were forging a partnership of respect and creative spirit. In the weeks that followed, Delia juggled her cafe shifts, small tailoring jobs, and bursts of preparation for her upcoming semester. Though she still struggled financially, knowing the stipend was on the horizon eased her fear. She began practicing new stitches, reading fashion history books from the library, and gathering notes on how to refine her design processes. Meanwhile, Julian found himself checking in occasionally, exchanging friendly texts or updates on foundation paperwork. She discovered his sense of humor via late-night banter, and he learned she had a fondness for old musicals, which she played on a rickety DVD player when she couldn't sleep. Little by little, they carved out a tentative bond, shaped by mutual respect and something akin to gentle companionship. Of course, questions arose from onlookers. Cafe co-workers teased Delia about the mysterious rich friend who sometimes dropped by. Janelle and a few DuPont board members wondered about Julian's personal investment in one scholarship student. But for now, none of it escalated into ugly gossip. Delia's sincerity and Julian's calm integrity spoke for themselves. At last, the day came for Delia's orientation, an official welcome ceremony for all new students. She arrived at the institute just after sunrise, heart clattering with excitement. She wore a self-stitched skirt and the lace-trimmed blouse, her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Others milled around in the lobby, some older, some fresh out of high school. A swirl of unfamiliar faces, but a staff member recognized her, directing her to the orientation hall. Inside, rows of chairs faced a small podium. Delia found a seat, scanning the crowd. A hush fell when the institute's director stepped up to deliver opening remarks. He spoke about creativity, discipline, pushing boundaries. Delia soaked in every word. After the speech, they broke into smaller groups by specialty. Delia followed the garment construction group, meeting several future classmates. She introduced herself shyly, receiving warm welcomes. They seemed curious about her background. Some recognized her name from the scholarship showcase. She braced for negative reactions but found only polite interest. Hours flew by. They toured labs, finalized ID badges, received class schedules. Delia's official pass bore her photo, name, and special scholarship label. She touched it reverently, half amazed it was real. As the orientation wound down, Delia stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. She leaned against a pillar, letting the bright afternoon sun wash over her. Her phone chimed, a message from Julian. "Orientation day. How goes it?" She smiled, typing back, "Amazing. I have my ID and schedule. Just finished touring the labs. Can't wait to start." His reply arrived swiftly. "Proud of you. Let me know if you want to celebrate sometime." She hesitated, heart flipping. Celebrate? The idea of going out for a real dinner, perhaps, instead of the cafe or cheap takeout, was both exciting and daunting. She typed, "That sounds nice. Maybe next week, once I settle in?" "Perfect. I'll make reservations. Take care." She pocketed the phone, eyes bright. In the courtyard nearby, other students chattered excitedly. A few recognized Delia from the workshop. They waved her over, and she joined, grateful for the camaraderie. Soon she was discussing thread tension and advanced draping with peers who shared her passion. That night, back in her apartment, she lovingly placed her new student ID beside her old sewing machine, symbols of two worlds colliding. She still lived in a cramped space. Her faucet still dripped, and money was still tight. But the horizon had shifted drastically. No longer was she the seamstress from the cafe. Soon she'd be Delia Ramos, design student under scholarship, shaping a future she'd once only dared to sketch in pencil. And as she drifted to sleep, she found her thoughts circling back to Julian. His belief in her, his quiet guidance, the way he'd shown her that help needn't be charity, but partnership. Their story wasn't a tidy fairy tale. There were still challenges, still judgments lurking, but each day they proved something essential, that a single chance meeting, a single act of compassion, could bridge two vastly different worlds. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to a new day of studying, sewing, balancing work. Her mind brimmed with designs, the convertible dress, a line of modular jackets, maybe even elaborate evening wear. Possibilities shone in front of her like 1,000 glinting beads, and for the first time in a very long while, Delia felt more than fleeting hope. She felt the sturdy foundation of real opportunity, one she intended to seize with both hands, forging a life of skill, artistry, and maybe, just maybe, a little happiness. The girl who'd once climbed into the wrong car by mistake had found an unexpected path to everything she'd ever dreamed, and she wouldn't let go of it for anything. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.